a mother of two, disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had two children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the £6,000 she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The record showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence, but by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew 4,000 British pound, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to 6,000 British pound. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away, Andrew said he accepted the dare. But as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it. But this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on Jeep's data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just 1 or 2, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds this wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed.
Brenda Michaela Gordillo was born on May 16, 1995, in Catamarca, Argentina. She is the only girl in a family of 3 children, with 2 older brothers, Yvonne and Federico. She also shared an especially close bond with her mother, Florin. She was a bright, organized, and responsible student, known for her friendly personality and ability to mediate conflicts. This aptitude eventually inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. As a child, Brenda participated in activities such as gymnastics, dancing, and acting in school plays, thoroughly enjoying her time on stage. She built many friendships and was well-liked for her helpful advice and understanding. After high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Buenos Aires, where she studied psychology with a specialization in negotiation and conflict resolution. A standout student, she consistently earned praise from her professors, who envisioned a bright future for her. She had plans to stay in the capital and build her career there. However, her life took an unexpected turn. During her second-to-last year of college, Brenda received heartbreaking news. Her father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss deeply affected her family, particularly her mother, who was left alone in their family home. By that time, Brenda's brothers had moved out and started their own families, while she remained in Buenos Aires, completing her degree. After graduating, Brenda returned to Catamarca to live with and support her mother. She found a job and decided to further her education by enrolling in law school at a local university. Returning to student life, she formed new friendships, one of which was with a young man named Naim Vera. Naim was born on June 11, 1999 in Catamarca, into a prestigious and wealthy family with a tradition of practicing medicine. His father was a renowned cardiac surgeon, and his mother ran a private pediatric practice. As the younger of 2 sons, Naim grew up alongside his brother Jamie, who was his complete opposite. While their parents provided the best possible opportunities for both, Jamie was hardworking and aspired to follow the family tradition by becoming a doctor. Naim, on the other hand, was far more relaxed, self-indulgent, and entitled. Naim impresses with his handsome appearance, modern fashion style, exuding confidence and receiving much love. Many girls at school admired him, and he thrived on the attention. However, in his final years of high school, he began using banned substances and often got into trouble. Thanks to his family's influence, he always avoided serious consequences. Over time, Naim developed a reputation for being arrogant and confrontational. He was a bully, quarrelsome, and prone to violent outbursts. Despite his privileged upbringing, his volatile nature often overshadowed his advantages. In 2018, after graduating from high school, Naim decided to turn his life around. He left behind his reckless behavior, sought treatment for his substance issues, and later gained acceptance into law school. It was during this new chapter of his life that he met Brenda. He was immediately captivated by her, and she was equally drawn to his confidence and bold demeanor. At the time, Brenda was 23, while Naeem had just turned 19. The age difference did not bother her, and she embraced his attention. When Brenda and Naeem first met, they spent hours talking at a bar. Later that night, they went to an apartment owned by Naeem's parents, to which he had access. That evening marked the beginning of their intimate relationship, and from then on, they began seeing each other frequently. For the first time, Brenda experienced what she believed to be true love and radiated happiness. Her friends and family noticed this transformation, often commenting on how joyful she had become. However, none of them had ever met Naeem, about whom Brenda talked a lot. Although she frequently mentioned Naeem, she only shared his photos from social media with her mother and brothers, casually hinting that he was her future fiancé. Over time, it became obvious that Naeem had no plans to introduce Brenda to his family or friends. Their relationship remained confined to the same apartment, and they never appeared in public together as a couple. Brenda thought it was unusual but convinced herself that Naeem just needed more time. Privately, she also worried that their age difference made him hesitant. The secret meetings lasted for many months, and she still invested a lot of emotions in this relationship. Even when Naeem began to grow distant, she chose to ignore the change in his behavior, clinging to the belief that their connection was still strong. One day, Brenda received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller identifies himself as Naeem's cousin and gives her a dire warning. He claimed that Naeem had a violent past and that, if not for the protection of his parents, Naeem would have already faced significant legal trouble for his actions. The caller advises her to end the relationship immediately before things get worse. However, she ignores his advice. In mid-February 2019, Brenda found out she was pregnant. The news took her by surprise, but after the initial shock, she felt genuinely happy. She sees this as an opportunity to improve her relationship with Naeem, hoping that this will make him more serious and willing to commit to her. When they met again, Brenda shared the news. At first, Naeem was silent, but his reaction quickly shifted to anger. He stated that he wasn't ready to become a father and insisted that having a child didn't align with his current plans. He urged Brenda to terminate the pregnancy, promising to cover all expenses. Brenda firmly refused, explaining that she had health issues and that being able to conceive was nothing short of a miracle. Their disagreement escalated, and Naeem ended the relationship, saying it was best for them to separate. For a time, they stopped seeing each other but continued exchanging messages on social media. During this period, Brenda confided in a close friend, admitting how much she missed him and expressing hope for reconciliation. She revealed that she had never loved anyone as deeply as she loved Naeem. Towards the end of February, Naeem called Brenda and proposed they meet to have a calm discussion. Brenda was thrilled, convinced that he had reconsidered. She excitedly shared the news with her best friend, who encouraged her and reassured her that everything would work out. They planned to meet on the night of February 28, 2019. That night, she was invited to a classmate's birthday party. After the party, she went to Naeem's apartment and never left again. The following day, Friday, March 1st, Brenda did not attend her university classes, which was highly out of character for her. She had never missed a lecture without a valid reason, and now no one could contact her or determine her whereabouts. Brenda's mother remembered her mentioning the birthday party and saying in advance that she wouldn't be home that night. However, she did not specify whether she would be with friends or her boyfriend. She had planned to go directly to class in the morning, so her mother wasn't initially concerned. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when the university contacted Brenda's family to ask about her absence, that her mother realized something was wrong. Friends and relatives quickly began searching for her. Everyone knew that she wouldn't just vanish without informing someone. At first, there was still hope. Perhaps she was simply spending time with Naeem and had lost track of time. But as relatives began calling around for information, something shocking occurred that changed everything. In that moment, all hope was lost. Brenda was gone forever. At this time, Naeem entered the Catamarca police station, accompanied by his father and 2 attorneys. He stated that he wished to confess to a tragic incident that had occurred the previous night. He was taken to an interrogation room, where he calmly recounted his version of the events. Although visibly distressed, he remained composed and spoke confidently. Naeem explained that he had arranged for a female acquaintance, Brenda, to visit his apartment that evening for an intimate encounter. He mentioned that they had met in this way before, without any commitments or expectations. However, that night, an argument broke out between them, leading Naeem to demand that she leave immediately. The apartment consisted of 2 levels connected by a staircase, and Naeem claimed that during the confrontation, Brenda stepped backward, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. He stated that he tried to catch her but failed. When he reached her, she was unresponsive. He said he attempted to help her, but it was too late. She had sustained a fatal neck injury from the fall. Panicked and fearing he would be blamed, Naeem made a rash decision to dispose of the body. He dragged Brenda to the terrace, where a large outdoor grill was located. Finding lighter fluid in a cabinet, he poured it over her body and lit a match. The fire ignited immediately, but the flames grew uncontrollably high, producing thick smoke. At this point, a neighbor from a nearby apartment noticed the activity and saw someone grilling late at night. When Naeem saw the neighbor, he waved and smiled, appearing calm and friendly. Later, the neighbor testified in court that Naeem's demeanor seemed normal, so he didn't report anything suspicious. Realizing that the grill couldn't be used to completely destroy the remains, Naeem abandoned the idea and brought the body back inside. He then packed the remains into garbage bags, placed them in boxes, and loaded them into his car. Driving aimlessly, he decided to discard the lower half in a random dumpster he passed. For the upper half, he drove out of the city to a shallow ravine near the roadway. He threw the remains into the ditch, covering them with dirt, branches, and trash. As he headed back to his car, a passing patrol unit stopped to check why his car was parked by the roadside. Thinking quickly, Naeem lied, saying that his girlfriend had called him and he had pulled over to talk. The officers believed him and left. Returning to his apartment, Naeem attempted to clean up but found the task overwhelming. In distress, he called his cousin and confessed everything over the phone. Initially, his cousin believed he was hallucinating or under the influence of a banned substance, but the seriousness of the situation soon became clear. The cousin contacted Naeem's father, who, with the help of attorneys, insisted that Naeem turn himself in to the authorities, hoping it would reduce his sentence. During his confession, Naeem disclosed the locations where he had disposed of the remains. Additionally, security camera footage showed him discarding garbage bags into a dumpster, with his car visible in the background. Even if he had tried to deny it, the evidence against him was irrefutable. Investigators quickly found the second box in the ravine, prompting forensic experts to examine the remains. Their analysis revealed a shocking truth that completely contradicted Naeem's account. Although the body had been severely burned, there were no injuries consistent with falling down the stairs, no broken bones, no significant bruising, and, most notably, Brenda's neck was unbroken. Instead, the autopsy revealed a far more sinister cause of death. The cartilage in Brenda's throat had been crushed, not accidentally but by forceful pressure from bare hands. Her official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. The horror didn't end there. Forensic experts found fabric fibers inside Brenda's mouth, later determined to be from her own scarf. This indicates that it had been forced into her mouth to silence her before the strangulation. Additionally, fresh scratches on Naeem's hands suggested that Brenda had fought back fiercely. The evidence made one thing clear: this was a calculated and deliberate act of violence, not an accident. When Brenda's family and friends were informed of the tragedy, a new detail emerged: her alleged pregnancy, which Naeem had never mentioned. Under questioning, he admitted that Brenda had been pressuring him for weeks, using the pregnancy to influence him. He explained that their relationship had been entirely physical, not romantic, and that there had been no discussions about a future together or starting a family. He claimed that when Brenda revealed she was pregnant, he immediately offered to pay for an abortion, but she refused. This disagreement had sparked several heated arguments. On the night of the incident, Brenda allegedly not only insisted on keeping the baby but also demanded that Naeem marry her. According to Naeem, her demands infuriated him, and, in a fit of rage, he ended her life. However, there was a major flaw in Naeem's story. An autopsy revealed that Brenda was not pregnant. If she had used the pregnancy as leverage, it was an empty claim. Investigators uncovered an even more shocking truth: Brenda had a medical condition that made pregnancy impossible, a fact she had known since her teenage years. So why had she told Naeem she was pregnant? One of Brenda's closest friends explained during questioning that Brenda genuinely believed she was pregnant. She had missed her period, experienced symptoms, and was overjoyed, thinking doctors had been wrong about her condition. When she shared the news with Naeem, he dismissed her claim and cut ties with her. Brenda confided in only 2 close friends about the pregnancy, never saw a doctor to confirm it, and didn't tell her mother. According to her closest friend, she had no intention of manipulating Naeem. She truly believed she was going to be a mother and had started imagining a future with him. Naeem was arrested the same day he turned himself in and shared his version of events. He claimed what happened was an accident. According to him, he panicked and, in his shock, made the horrific decision to dispose of Brenda's body in a brutal way. He also insisted that their connection was purely casual, with no emotional commitment or real relationship. In Argentina, crimes within romantic or domestic relationships are classified as aggravated offenses due to the victim's vulnerable position. Victims typically trust their partner, do not perceive them as a threat, and may have a diminished sense of self-preservation. If the court ruled that Brenda and Naeem had a real relationship, he could face life in prison. However, if he convinced the court it was merely a casual arrangement with no emotional ties, his sentence might be reduced to a maximum of 15 years. Naeem and his legal team, hired by his father, focused on proving this. Naeem's lawyers argued that he and Brenda were never seen together in public, had no shared photos, and had not introduced each other to their families or friends. However, Brenda's family and friends described a different reality. They insisted that Brenda was deeply in love with Naeem and believed he felt the same. She avoided pressuring him or pushing for formal introductions to his family, assuming he simply needed time. One of Naeem's classmates later disclosed that Naeem had never taken Brenda seriously. He enjoyed spending time with her but had been leading her on, giving her false hope. When Brenda told him she was pregnant, he reportedly panicked and became desperate to find a way out. The classmate claimed Naeem had said the baby would never be born or he would end his life. At the time, nobody thought much of his words. However, about a week before the crime, Naeem allegedly approached his cousin, asking if he knew someone who could solve a problem in exchange for money. His cousin dismissed it as a joke and didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until the night of the crime, when Naeem called asking for help to cover up what he had done, that his cousin realized the gravity of the situation. After the tragedy, Naeem's family publicly expressed their condolences to Brenda's loved ones, stating that her loss had devastated their own lives as well. Despite this, his legal team worked to minimize his responsibility, alleging that Brenda had been manipulating and pressuring him. They even accused her of faking the pregnancy to trap him into marriage, claiming she had ulterior motives and saw Naeem as a wealthy and promising husband. Naeem also tried to argue that he acted in a moment of extreme distress, but his defense quickly crumbled. During his first interrogation, he provided detailed descriptions of how he disposed of Brenda's remains, details that were inconsistent with someone allegedly in shock. Additionally, a neighbor's testimony proved damning. The neighbor recounted seeing Naeem grilling on the terrace that night and noted that he appeared calm and composed. The neighbor even remembered Naeem waving hello in a friendly manner, as if everything were normal. The psychiatric evaluation concluded that Naeem was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime and could be held legally responsible. However, specialists diagnosed him with psychopathic traits, borderline personality disorder, and bipolar affective disorder. Despite these diagnoses, none diminished his legal accountability. Naeem's family was wealthy and well-connected, which could have enabled him to avoid full responsibility. His legal team deliberately delayed the trial, hoping public interest would eventually wane. Brenda's family feared that Naeem might receive a light sentence or even evade justice entirely. Determined to prevent this, Brenda's mother took action. She organized numerous protests and marches, demanding justice for her daughter. Feminist activists also joined the effort, ensuring the case remained in the public spotlight. The trial began in May 2021 and attracted widespread media attention. A key focus of the proceedings was defining the relationship between Naeem and Brenda. His defense attorneys argued that, given his young age, he was not ready for a serious commitment and that his relationship with Brenda was nothing more than a casual fling. If the defense managed to convince the court, Naeem could have received a lighter sentence. Additionally, they sought to prove that the crime was not premeditated, which could have made him eligible for parole within 5 to 7 years. During the trial, Naeem remained cold and detached, showing no remorse for his actions. Following his attorney's advice, he apologized formally to Brenda's family, but his apology came across as insincere and even mocking. On May 14, 2021, Naeem was convicted of aggravated homicide and attempting to conceal the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and was also ordered to pay Brenda's family 3 million pesos in moral damages. Naeem refused to make a final statement and listened to the verdict with an indifferent expression, as if it did not affect him. Immediately after the sentencing, his attorneys announced their intention to file an appeal. As the legal team prepared for the appeal, looking for new witnesses and evidence to support Naeem's innocence, the media uncovered incidents from his past that his parents had previously concealed. 2 former classmates accused Naeem of harassment and aggressive behavior. Both women agreed to testify, describing him as a dangerous individual who could not handle rejection. While he was often pursued by girls, on the occasions when someone rejected his advances, he responded by stalking, threatening, and trying to humiliate them. One classmate described how she had to transfer schools after Naeem tried to force himself on her. When she resisted, he retaliated by spreading malicious rumors and leaking private photos of her online. At the time, his father's legal team had managed to suppress these incidents. In March 2022, a retrial was held for Brenda's case. With the new testimonies considered, the court upheld its original ruling. Naeem Vera was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 51 years. On June 9, 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, concerns grew among Travis Alexander's friends when they realized they had not heard from him in 5 days. This was unusual for the outgoing young man who typically stayed connected. After several ignored calls and messages since June 4, concerned friends decided to visit him. When they arrived at his home, everything outside looked normal. They rang the doorbell several times but got no answer. Before leaving, one of the friends recalled that a mutual acquaintance knew the garage door code. After explaining the situation, that friend agreed to come over and assist. As soon as they entered the garage, a strong, unpleasant smell overwhelmed them. Initially, they thought it might be from Alexander's dog. However, as they climbed the stairs, the smell grew worse, indicating something was seriously wrong. They knocked on Alexander's bedroom door, but got no response. Inside, they discovered a large pool of blood soaking into the carpet, leading to the bathroom. In the shower, they found Alexander's body. He had 29 stab wounds, a deep cut across his throat that severed major blood vessels, and a gunshot wound above his left eyebrow. His fingers and toes had darkened, indicating he had been dead for several days. They immediately called 911. The dispatcher asked Alexander if he was suicidal or if someone was angry enough to hurt him. Alexander's friends mentioned Jodi Arias by name as a possible suspect, saying Alexander had told them she had stalked him, accessed his Facebook account, and slashed his tires. When the authorities arrived, there were no signs of forced entry, and the house appeared undisturbed, suggesting that the killer was someone Travis knew and trusted. Blood spatter covered the hallway and bathroom walls. A bloody left-hand palm print was found on the wall. The bathroom sink was stained. Long strands of dark hair, likely from a woman, were discovered in the shower and on the floor. Police also found a digital camera inside the washing machine, which was soaked and seemingly damaged. Forensic technicians were able to recover several images from its memory card. The photos taken on June 4 showed Travis and Jodi Arias, his ex-girlfriend, in intimate poses, with the final image, time-stamped at 5:29 p.m., capturing Travis alive in the shower, followed by accidental shots believed to have been taken moments after the attack began. DNA samples were collected from all individuals who had contact with Alexander. Jodi's name surfaced frequently during the investigation. Alexander had ended their relationship months prior, citing her obsessive and controlling behavior. Before the police could contact Jodi, she reached out to authorities herself. She expressed her devastation and offered to assist, claiming that the last time she saw Alexander was in April. Jodi Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to William and Sandra Arias. She grew up in what seemed to be a stable household. However, Jodi later claimed that she was physically abused by her parents starting at the age of 7. From a young age, She developed a strong interest in photography, which she continued to pursue throughout her teenage years. In the fall of 2001, she began working as a waitress in Carmel, California. In September 2006, Jody met 29-year-old Alexander at a company conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. They felt an immediate attraction to each other. Alexander, a successful motivational speaker, had a challenging upbringing. He was one of 8 children raised by banned substance-addicted parents and later lived with his devout Mormon grandmother after his parents divorced. He embraced the teachings of the church and used his difficult experiences to motivate others. Despite the challenges he faced, Alexander worked hard to create a stable life and became an example of personal growth. After the conference, they exchanged phone numbers, even though Alexander lived in Arizona and Jody in California. A week later, they met again and became physically intimate that night. After maintaining constant communication through texts, calls, emails, and daily interactions, Jody was baptized into the Mormon Church on November 26, 2006, hoping this would make her more compatible with Alexander. 3 months later, they officially became a couple, and Jody moved to Mesa, Arizona, to be closer to him. However, things soon took a turn for the worse. Jody found messages from another woman on Alexander's phone and accused him of infidelity. This led to a dramatic change in her behavior. She became more jealous, possessive, and emotionally unstable. She often checked his phone, questioned where he was, and expressed her anger frequently. Alexander, who had initially been hopeful about their relationship, started to feel trapped. He shared with friends that Jody was distancing him from his faith, and he began to doubt if she was the right person for him. Their relationship officially ended just a few months later, but they continued to have secret intimate encounters, often traveling together for work. Jody believed they had a future together, while Alexander started dating other women. He believed that Jody had vandalized his car by slashing his tires twice, sending anonymous threatening emails to him and his new partner. Friends remembered him mentioning that she had once broken into his house by crawling through the doggy door. Despite these warning signs, their physical relationship persisted. They shared intimate photos, and Jody continued to obsess over him. By mid-2008, Alexander told his friends that Jody had hacked into his social media accounts. He expressed feeling haunted by her and was unsure how to escape the situation. Alexander and Jody's relationship ended when he invited another woman to join him on a trip. Initially, Alexander intended to take Jody, but he changed his plans at the last minute. When Jody found out she had been replaced, she was furious. On May 28, 2008, there was a reported burglary at Jody's grandparents' home in Yreka, California, where she was staying at the time. A handgun was among the stolen items. On the morning of June 2nd, Jody left her grandparents' house at 5:39 a.m. and traveled to Redding, California, where she rented a car at 8:04 a.m. She opted for a discreet colored vehicle instead of a red one. Jody also brought gasoline containers with her, which was unusual and indicated her plan to hide her travel route. She told friends she was going to Utah to meet a colleague who worked with her in prepaid legal services. In reality, her destination was Mesa, Arizona, an 11-hour drive away. The gas canisters allowed her to refuel without stopping at public gas stations, avoiding security cameras and leaving no digital payment trail. On June 3, 2008, between 1 a.m. and 3 p.m., Jody Arias called Travis Alexander 4 times, but he did not answer. Later, he returned her calls, leading to an 18-minute conversation followed by a 41-minute chat. The content of their discussion is unknown, but events that followed were significant. On June 4th, Jody arrived in Salt Lake City to meet her colleague, Ryan Burns. He immediately noticed something unusual about her. Her hands had cuts. When he asked about her injuries, she casually claimed they were from broken glass at work. Despite, she appeared cheerful and even more energetic than usual. That same day, Alexander missed a scheduled conference call, which worried his friends as he was known for being punctual and professional. Days went by without any contact from him. On June 9th, his body was found in his home in Mesa, Arizona, in a horrific scene that shocked his community. On June 17, Jody voluntarily provided her DNA and fingerprints to the investigators. At that time, she was not considered a primary suspect. Her willingness to cooperate and calm demeanor seemed at odds with the description of her as an erratic, possessive person by Alexander's friends. However, this perception changed just 2 days later. Forensic technicians were able to recover deleted images from Alexander's damaged digital camera. One of the final images revealed his bloody body on the bathroom floor, while another image seemed to show Jody's foot. When police reached out to Jody again, she denied being in Mesa at the time of the murder, claiming she was in Salt Lake City and that Ryan Burns could confirm her alibi. Burns supported her story but noted her unusual hair color and the cuts on her hands. However, lab results revealed more incriminating evidence. A bloody palm print at the crime scene contained DNA from both Jody and Alexander. By July 15, 2008, investigators had gathered enough evidence to formally question Jody. Detective Esteban Flores led the interrogation, challenging her timeline and pointing out an unexplained 18-hour gap during her trip from California to Utah. Cell phone records indicated that her phone had been turned off for an extended period, likely to prevent leaving a digital trace. Despite being confronted with forensic evidence, blood, fingerprints, and photos, Jody continued to deny any involvement. She claimed the images were altered and that she was unaware of what had happened. Eventually, she broke down in tears. What happened next astonished everyone watching the surveillance footage. When Jody was left alone in the interrogation room, her behavior became strange. She knelt on the floor, sang to herself calmly, and talked as if someone else was present. When informed she would be photographed for booking, she asked if she could put on makeup, smiling and asking, "How do I look?" before the camera captured her image. In the days that followed, her account changed. Initially, she admitted she was with Alexander the night he died, but then she created a new story. She claimed that 2 masked intruders, one male, one female, broke into the house, killed Alexander. They threatened her by saying they would harm her family if she spoke. She said she had hidden in a closet during the attack and left only after the intruders were gone. However, despite her tears and shaky voice, her story had inconsistencies. Eventually, Jody changed her narrative again. This time, she confessed to killing Alexander but claimed it was in self-defense. She stated that he had attacked her in a fit of rage, prompting her to fight back. She couldn't remember the details, only that she later found herself driving with blood on her hands and no clear recollection of what had happened. After killing Travis Alexander, Jody Arias fled into the desert. During her escape, she stopped her car, changed her clothes, and threw the blood-stained clothes into a dumpster. She then continued driving toward her destination. Soon after, she appeared in front of the media, confidently claiming her innocence. Jody told reporters that the evidence would prove her guiltlessness and insisted that no jury could ever convict her. Despite her efforts to create an alibi, carefully plan her route, and eliminate any evidence of her actions, the reality of the situation was much worse than she expected. As investigators pieced together the events of June 4th, a disturbing sequence of actions unfolded. That afternoon, Jody and Alexander were intimate, as they had been many times before, and took several pictures together. Afterward, Alexander went into the shower. While he was showering, Jody retrieved a knife she had hidden in her clothing. Under the guise of continuing their photo session, she entered the bathroom. The last photo captured Travis sitting in the shower just moments before she attacked him. Jody struck him with brutal force. He put up a struggle, as evidenced by defensive wounds on his hands. Bloodied and disoriented, he stumbled out of the shower towards the sink, coughing up blood and staining the counter. Despite his attempts to call for help, he couldn't get the words out. As he tried to escape down the hallway, Jody followed him and repeatedly stabbed him in the back. She ultimately pulled his head back and slit his throat, leaving a large pool of blood on the carpet. In her attempt to drag his body back to the bathroom, Jody pressed her bloody hand against the wall for support, leaving a crucial palm print that contained both her DNA and Alexander's. During the struggle, the camera they had used earlier fell over, capturing a blurry image of Jody's foot next to Alexander's blood-soaked body. After witnessing him convulsing from his injuries, she fired a final attack into his forehead. The entire attack lasted approximately 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Jodi Arias's trial started on January 2013. Her defense argued that she acted in self-defense. She admitted to killing Alexander but claimed he attacked her after she accidentally dropped his camera. According to her, he became furious, hit her, and broke her finger. Fearful for her safety, she said she ran to his closet, took a gun she said was his, and fired in desperation. When he continued to approach her, she said she stabbed him but could not remember how or when it happened. The prosecutors disagreed, arguing that the evidence suggested her actions were planned and deliberate. Witnesses testified that she had borrowed gas canisters, indicating she intended to drive a long distance without stopping to avoid detection. Audio recordings and text messages showed a complicated and toxic relationship between Jodi and Alexander. While Jodi portrayed herself as a victim of abuse, the prosecutors pointed out her obsessive behavior and manipulative history. At one stage, she even accused Alexander of being a child abuser, a claim that lacked evidence and complicated the emotional context of the trial. To support her defense, Jodi's lawyers claimed she experienced memory loss due to severe psychological trauma. A clinical psychologist testified that she might have had an acute stress response, which could have triggered a fight-or-flight reaction that affected her memory. He indicated that she showed signs of anxiety resulting from long-term trauma. In contrast, the prosecution's psychologist diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder, describing her as emotionally unstable, manipulative, and prone to extreme, unpredictable behavior. During the trial, Jodi spent 18 days on the witness stand, often contradicting herself and displaying exaggerated emotions. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder on May 8, 2013. All 12 jurors found her guilty of first-degree murder. 7 of the 12 found her guilty of felony murder. As the verdict was read, Alexander's family smiled and hugged each other. The crowd outside the courtroom began cheering and chanting. However, during sentencing, the jurors were unable to agree on whether she should receive the death penalty. The trial's aggravating phase began on May 15, 2013. The only witness was the medical examiner who performed Alexander's autopsy. Jodi's attorneys, who had repeatedly asked to withdraw from the case, gave only a brief opening statement and a closing argument in which they said the adrenaline rushing through Alexander's body may have prevented him from feeling much pain while he died. Prosecutor Martinez showed the jury photos of the body and the crime scene, then paused for 2 minutes to illustrate the time he claimed Alexander died. On May 23, during the sentencing phase of Jodi's trial, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, leading the judge to call for a retrial for that part of the case. The jury eventually voted 8-4 in favor of the death penalty. After being dismissed, jury foreman Zavakos expressed that the jury found the decision regarding the death penalty to be very challenging and were frustrated that their work resulted in a retrial. On October 21, 2014, Jodi Arias's retrial started with opening statements and an evidentiary hearing. During the first trial, the prosecution's witness, Amanda Webb, had been called to counter Jodi's claim that she returned a tank of gas to Walmart on May 8, 2007. However, she admitted she was unsure if all the store's records had been transferred after its relocation. The trial resumed in January 2015. Experts from the Mesa Police revealed that Alexander's laptop contained viruses and adult content, which contradicted testimonies from the first trial in 2013. Jury deliberations began on February 12, 2015. On March 2, 2015, the jury informed Judge Stevens that they were unable to reach a unanimous decision. Jodi's attorneys requested a retrial. Judge Stevens denied this request, provided the jury with additional instructions, and instructed them to continue their discussions. By March 5, 2015, Judge Stevens declared a retrial because the jury, after deliberating for about 26 hours over 5 days, had reached a deadlock with an 11-1 vote in favor of the death penalty. The 11 jurors who supported the death penalty tried unsuccessfully to have the lone dissenting juror removed, claiming she was biased. By this time, the total cost of Arias's trials had reached approximately $3 million. Sentencing for Jodi Arias was set for April 7, 2015. Judge Stevens had two options: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. On April 13th, Stevens chose to sentence Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In June 2015, after a restitution hearing, Jodi was ordered to pay over $32,000 to the siblings of Alexander. Her attorneys argued that this amount was about one-third of what had been requested. On July 6, 2018, Jodi's current attorneys, Margaret M. Green, also known as Peg Green, and Corey Engel, filed a 324-page appeal to the Court of Appeals, seeking to overturn her murder conviction. On October 17, 2019, her attorneys argued that the conviction should be overturned because the prosecutor, Martinez, had acted improperly during the trial, contributing to a media frenzy that affected the trial's outcome. However, on March 24, 2020, the court ruled that despite the prosecutor's egregious misconduct, Jodi Arias had been convicted based on overwhelming evidence of her guilt, and they upheld the conviction. Finally, on November 4, 2020, the Arizona Supreme Court decided not to review the case. As of 2023, Jodi is incarcerated at the Arizona Department of Corrections, located at the Arizona State Prison Complex Perryville. She began her sentence at the complex's maximum security Lumley unit.
On December 5, 1975, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a married couple was on their way home from a school basketball game. At around 8:30 p.m., the wife decided to visit her niece, Lindy, who lived nearby. They parked their car near the apartment complex, and she got out to quickly check on her niece, leaving her husband in the car. However, when she reached the apartment, she discovered that the front door was unlocked. Cautiously peering inside, she saw a knocked-over floor lamp and other items scattered around. The disarray of the apartment indicated that a fight had occurred. When she noticed strange stains on the floor resembling blood, she stepped into the living room. What she discovered would haunt her forever. In the center of the room lay Lindy, with a knife stabbed into her throat. Overwhelmed with panic, she ran out of the house and hurried to her car to call the police. The police arrived at the scene and were baffled about who could have had a conflict with the young 19-year-old girl, who had recently gotten married. They wondered what could have led to her brutal murder. Lindy Sue Beekler was born on January 31, 1956. Her parents divorced when she was very young. She was raised by her mother. Her father moved to the suburbs, remarried, and had a son with his new wife, making him Lindy's half-brother. From a young age, Lindy was curious and cheerful. She loved exploring new activities. Lindy participated in the Girl Scouts, went hiking, enjoyed boating, and joined different clubs. Lindy was a positive person who made everyone feel good. Her bright smile encouraged others to smile too. Above all, she treasured her family. One of her favorite things to do was curl up on the couch with her mother. In those moments, she felt like the happiest person alive because her mother was not only a caring parent, but also her best friend. Recently, Lindy had been employed at a flower shop, where her boss and co-workers described her as very hardworking, humble, and somewhat shy. However, once they got to know her better, Lindy revealed her fun side. She had a great sense of humor. Despite this, she preferred not to be the center of attention. Lindy married at a young age despite her insecurities. Her husband, Philip Beekler, was 5 years older than her. They first met when Lindy was visiting her sister. They were instantly attracted to each other. On October 19th, the year before the attack, Lindy and Philip tied the knot. The ceremony was officiated by Philip's grandfather, who blessed their union, saying they were perfect for one another. Philip worked part-time as an agent at a car rental company while studying art at Millersville State College. It appeared he was inspired by his parents. His mother owned an art gallery and was deeply passionate about art. Lindy is just 2 months away from turning 20 and has recently begun to embrace adult life as a married woman. Philip and Lindy were happily living together in their small one-bedroom apartment. However, Lindy felt uneasy being home alone. She never felt safe since they moved in. She constantly sensed that someone was watching her through the sliding glass door, though she couldn't pinpoint anyone specific. Overall, she was simply afraid to be alone in the apartment. In January, they planned to move to a new place in Manor Township. In the evenings, Lindy got home from work a couple of hours before her husband. She would lock the doors and turn on all the lights, carefully listening to every noise. During the investigation of the crime scene, the police found that Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. The attack involved 2 different knives. One knife, which the attacker had brought, was never found, while the other knife came from Lindy's kitchen. This kitchen knife was still in her neck when her aunt discovered her. Lindy's body showed 11 stab wounds to her chest and upper abdomen, 5 to her back, and 3 to her neck. One of the stabs had pierced the carotid artery, causing her to bleed to death. Experts noted that Lindy had defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought fiercely for her life until the very end. The apartment was in chaos, with blood everywhere. It appeared that, after finishing her shift at the flower shop, Lindy had stopped to buy groceries, as bags of food were left on the kitchen table, still unpacked. This indicates that the attack occurred right after she returned home. Several pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene. A shoe print, likely size 10 or 11, was discovered on the kitchen floor. This print suggested that the attacker was likely a large, strong man. Another piece of evidence hinted at a possible motive, although Lindy was fully clothed when found. Detectives suspected she had been abused. Male fluid was discovered on her underwear, which could provide the perpetrator's DNA. However, in 1975, forensic capabilities were limited. Experts could only identify the attacker's blood type and compare it with that of a suspect, but they needed to identify a suspect first. Unfortunately, that was where the evidence trail ended. The police also lacked the perpetrator's fingerprints, as the knife handle found in Lindy's throat was wrapped in a kitchen towel. The news of Lindy's tragic death devastated her family. Relatives called Philip at work, telling him he needed to come home immediately because something had happened to Lindy. As he rushed to their apartment, he feared the worst, but he could never have imagined that his beloved wife had been brutally killed. The police did not allow Philip inside the apartment, leaving him confused about what had happened. They kept him in the hallway until he found out the heartbreaking news that Lindy was dead. Seeing how pale he became, medics gave him a sedative, and the police took him to his mother's house. For about 4 days, Philip felt lost. He couldn't tell whether it was day or night or how much time had passed since the tragedy. He had to sit and wait for answers while the police continued their investigation. Detectives interviewed her co-workers and employer, and none of them noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Lindy went to work at the flower shop in a good mood. That day, she did not appear anxious or scared. There were no dissatisfied customers. Everything was completely normal. Lindy excitedly shared with her colleagues about the Christmas gift she had prepared for her husband. That evening, she calmly got into her car, waved goodbye to her colleagues, and drove home. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be her last evening alive. Around 5:30 p.m. After work, Lindy went to the car dealership where her husband, Philip, worked to pick up his paycheck. She cashed the check at the bank and then went to a nearby grocery store to buy groceries, filling 4 bags. Afterward, she headed home, parked her car, and began unloading the bags. It seemed likely she would need to make 2 trips. At that moment, someone likely entered her apartment and attacked her. Detectives speculated on this since there were no signs of forced entry, and Lindy was not the kind of person to let a stranger into her home. This led the police to believe that Lindy knew her attacker, felt safe being alone with them. The first person the detectives looked at as a suspect was the victim's husband, Philip. However, the family and friends insisting that Philip and Lindy were a happy couple. Philip deeply loved Lindy and felt incredibly lucky to be dating her. Amazed that someone so beautiful would be interested in him, he said she changed his life for the better by inspiring him to enroll in college and pursue painting. In return, he supported her dream of opening a flower shop. When Lindy was killed, it devastated Philip. He couldn't bear to stay in their apartment, where every corner reminded him of her, so he moved out. Although he had a strong alibi, investigators were slow to clear him as a suspect. Following Lindy's death, Philip felt lost. He wandered the streets for hours, dropped out of college. They had dreamt of finishing their studies, starting a family, and planning their future together. Now, in an instant, all their dreams collapsed, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Philip had to completely rebuild his life in light of this tragic reality. The second suspect in the investigation was Bob, Lindy's direct supervisor. His favorable comments and positive evaluations of Lindy took an unexpected turn. The day before her tragic death, Lindy baked him blueberry muffins for his birthday. Bob spoke so highly of her that police began to question whether he had developed an inappropriate attachment. At 35 years old, single, and without an alibi, Bob caught the attention of the authorities, prompting them to scrutinize him more closely. The pressure became overwhelming, leading him to hire a lawyer to safeguard his privacy. Bob passed a lie detector test and fully cooperated with the police. After clearing both Lindy's husband and Bob as suspects, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including friends, family, and acquaintances. Yet they found no one who might have wanted to harm her. Neighbors were also questioned, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that day. The atmosphere in the apartment complex grew tense as residents began purchasing weapons for protection. While violence in other neighborhoods was concerning, the murder of a young woman next door felt particularly alarming. A note from the police was taped to the Beechlers' front door, indicating that it was a crime scene and restricting access for local residents. This served as a constant reminder of the tragedy and the unsettling reality that the killer might still be nearby. The investigation hit a dead end. The only clue from neighbors was a report of an unfamiliar dark-colored car parked outside Lindy's house at the time of her death, with its headlights on. Even if the driver was not involved in the crime, they could have been a witness. However, locating the car proved to be impossible. Neighbors' descriptions varied widely, and no one could recall the license plate number. Meanwhile, the police station was overwhelmed with calls. Although some leads seemed promising, none led to concrete answers, forcing investigators to develop their own theories. One theory suggested that Lindy was being stalked by someone who observed her and her husband's routines, waiting for the right moment to attack. It's possible the intruder entered the apartment while Lindy was unloading groceries, or that it was a burglar who planned to steal valuables, but panicked and assaulted her with a knife when she unexpectedly returned. However, the burglary theory was weak because Lindy's purse, containing her jewelry, was still in the apartment. Additionally, the nature of the abuse assault did not align with typical burglar behavior. The police eventually identified an 18-year-old suspect, who was arrested. He was known for committing terrible acts. He had already attacked 4 women, binding them with their own clothing and stabbing them with a screwdriver. In one instance, when a victim attempted to flee, he chased her in his car and tried to run her over. The location and timing of his crimes made the police suspect his involvement in Lindy's attack. However, investigations revealed he was not connected to that incident, as he was at work that day, supported by multiple colleagues. In December 1976, Lindy's family visited her grave to pay their respects. What they found left them in shock. Someone had vandalized the grave. The headstone was covered in knife marks. Pieces of it were scattered nearby, and the rest was splattered with red spray paint. The police took this incident seriously, as they believed the vandal might have also been involved in Lindy's death. The use of a knife suggested the vandal was aware of how Lindy had died, and notably, only her grave had been targeted in the entire cemetery. Since the family had kept the burial location private, it indicated that the vandal had intentionally sought it out, possibly by following family members. Unfortunately, the detectives were unable to identify the culprit. An entire year went by without any answers, leaving Lindy's family in a state of confusion and distress about what happened to her. In the following years, detectives looked into many people who were connected to Lindy's life. They examined her mother's boyfriend, looked into frequent customers of the flower shop, and even explored possible connections to serial killers active in Pennsylvania at that time. In their search for answers, they even consulted psychics. Despite these efforts, the case of Lindy Beechler's death remained unsolved. 25 years after Lindy's tragic death, The lead detective retired, leaving the Lindy case as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Lancaster County. In 2006, the investigation into Lindy's death was transferred to a special group in Pennsylvania that focused on old unsolved cases, utilizing new techniques and perspectives. However, they too were unable to make any progress. Decades after his wife's death, Philip Buechler discovered the DNA analysis techniques used to convict the perpetrator. He believed these methods could also be applied to his wife Lindy's case. In 2019, police applied these techniques to analyze DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect based on the DNA. A computer program produced two portraits. One depicted how the suspect likely appeared at the time of Lindy's attack, and the other showed what the suspect might look like at age 65. While the portraits weren't exact representations, they revealed important details about the suspect, including fair skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and possible distinctive features. Despite this progress, locating the suspect was still difficult. The DNA sample was analyzed by C.C. Moore, a well-known American genetic genealogist. She discovered that the DNA found on the victim's underwear in 1975 was connected to a small town in Italy. Moore invested a lot of time identifying individuals with Italian ancestry who were living in Lancaster County at the time of Lindy's murder. She traced the migration patterns from this small Italian town to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After ruling out over 2,000 individuals with similar genetic profiles, she was able to use public records to narrow it down to one suspect. This led her to identify the likely killer, a man named David Sinopoli. Investigators checked the name against existing databases, but found no records. This man had never been noticed by the police before, and his name was not on any suspect lists. However, while reviewing the case files, detectives learned that David lived in the same apartment complex as the Buechlers. To establish his connection to Lindy's death, they needed to obtain David's DNA. On February 11, 2022, David was at Philadelphia International Airport waiting for his flight. To pass the time, he bought coffee, not realizing that police were observing him from afar. After David finished his coffee, he threw the empty cup into a trash bin. An officer then discreetly collected the discarded cup and placed it in a plastic bag for further examination. The cup was sent to a lab for DNA analysis, which revealed a match between the DNA on the cup and the seminal fluid found on Lindy Buechler's underwear, confirming that David Sinopoli had been at the crime scene. Additionally, 2 drops of blood found on her stockings matched his DNA, providing further evidence. Initially, investigators thought the significant amount of blood at the crime scene belonged to the victim. However, they also considered the possibility that the perpetrator had injured himself and left behind traces of his blood. On July 17, 2022, around 7 a.m., police arrived at David's home, a few miles from the site where Lindy was murdered years earlier. He did not resist arrest, but his wife, who had been married to him for 36 years, was completely shocked. They had 3 children and 9 grandchildren, all of whom were unaware that they had been living with a criminal and murderer. Following the tragic murder of 19-year-old Lindy, David had lived quietly for nearly 47 years, never revealing his past and believing he would escape punishment. After David was arrested, Lindy's family had a reason to celebrate. Unfortunately, many family members never got to see justice served. Lindy's father died in 2000, and her mother followed in 2007. Her husband, Philip, was still alive and had remarried around 1990. Even though he hadn't initially planned to, he wanted to honor Lindy's hopes for him by finishing college, attending graduate school, and becoming an artist, which he accomplished. Eventually, he was able to let go of the tragedy and move forward with his life. The day after David's arrest, the police held a press conference announcing that they considered the case of Lindy Buechler's murder closed. Friends and family of David struggled to believe he was involved, thinking there must have been a misunderstanding. However, it's painful to acknowledge that this man evaded consequences for his actions for nearly 50 years, living as if nothing had happened after taking a young woman's future. Years went by, but the police never forgot about the case and continuously worked to solve it. Eventually, justice was served. David Sinopoli was taken into custody without the option for bail. Initially, he strongly denied any connection to Buechler's death, but as the trial date approached, he changed his mind and agreed to a plea deal. On October 19, 2023, 48 years after the crime, David Sinopoli pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. He received a prison sentence of 25 to 50 years. The judge mentioned that considering the defendant's age, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. David never explained why he killed Lindy by brutally stabbing her 19 times and violating her body to fulfill his selfish desires. Lindy and David were neighbors in the same apartment complex, but there is no evidence that they ever interacted prior to the crime. This leaves the true motives behind his actions a mystery, even to the police. It's possible that David was strongly attracted to her and eventually succumbed to his hidden urges. His primal instincts took over, which is why he is now in prison.
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Carolyn Watson. If kidnapping is not about satisfying the criminal's painful desires, then most often, the attackers seek money. But it is not always that simple. Some frightening actions have a much more mundane nature. Budgeree, in Australia, does not seem like a place where something terrifying could happen. It is a rural and remote area with a population of fewer than 200 people. Located in the peaceful region of Victoria, it is not even marked on all maps. The local community consists of only a few dozen families, and everyone knows each other well. However, this calm and measured pace did not prevent criminal stories from surfacing. The media began to write about the quiet and prosperous life in Budgeree, which changed in 2008 due to an event that made the entire continent shudder. A man named Julian Buchwald, 25, lived there. His family owns a large piece of land in the area. Julian had a girlfriend, 17-year-old Carolyn Watson, who lived in a neighboring town. They had been dating for about 2 years. Even in his younger years, Julian loved to explore the surroundings, especially his plot of land, to satisfy his natural curiosity. The difficult terrain, combined with the abundance of vegetation, offered plenty of opportunities for imagination and exploration. Both Julian and Carolyn continued to live with their parents. Despite dating for 2 years, they were very serious about their relationship. They often discussed the prospects of marriage. Being deeply religious individuals, just like their families, they even visited the local pastor of the church to declare their desire to marry during a Sunday service, where they had first met. Faith played a significant role in their lives. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Julian picked up Carolyn from her home for a picnic. She lived in the neighboring town of Churchill, which was a bit larger, with about 5,000 people. It was located about 20 minutes away by car from Budgeree. After leaving, they returned to Julian's house because he had forgotten some food in the car that could spoil in the heat. They gathered everything they needed and quickly left before it got too hot. Typically, Julian and Carolyn would relax on Julian's family property, where there were plenty of secluded spots that looked picturesque for a romantic outing. However, this time, they decided to venture further to visit a nearby waterfall. Around 3 p.m., they planned to return. Most of the journey went smoothly, but just before reaching the waterfall, Julian suddenly became alarmed. He noticed the carcass of an animal on the side of the road, so he slowed down and stopped at a safe distance around a small bend. He told Carolyn that he wanted to get out to check, as he thought the animal might still be alive and he could help it. This curiosity wasn't unusual for him. Carolyn had gotten used to these quirks and decided to wait for him inside the SUV while following his movements in the rearview mirror. At some point, Carolyn became distracted. When she looked back again, she no longer saw Julian. She assumed he had gone behind the hill or a turn, which is why she was out of view. But after some time, Julian still hadn't returned, and this began to worry her. He always came back quickly. Realizing they were far from the city and in the wilderness, Carolyn was afraid to get out of the car. Her boyfriend's absence increasingly troubled her. Suddenly, she caught sight of something even more frightening in the mirror. A figure darted into view. She saw a man standing next to the car. He looked threatening, fully dressed with gloves, and wearing a balaclava. Carolyn intended to lock the doors of the car, but the stranger had already jumped to her side, opened the door. Before she could react, pulled her out of the car and threw her to the ground. He covered her mouth with tape, silencing her screams, and she could barely resist. Within minutes, the kidnapper had bound and blindfolded her, then shoved her into the trunk of his car. Terrified, Carolyn hoped that Julian would return to save her. However, the kidnapper got behind the wheel and drove away, leaving her alone with her fear. She tried to escape, but the ropes were too tight to loosen. It felt like the trip lasted several hours. Eventually, the SUV came to a stop, the trunk opened. The kidnapper, still wearing a balaclava and gloves, stood in front of her again. He threw her onto the ground, and Carolyn realized she was still unable to free herself from her bindings. Despite her desperate attempts to do so, she had little idea of where she was located, but she saw that there was a dense forest surrounding her. The stranger tore off her clothes, using a knife to cut away her underwear, and then walked away. Carolyn was completely naked, lying next to the car. She heard a sound as if the kidnapper was digging. This noise came from a few meters away. Carolyn realized that she was about to die. She could not imagine what awaited her, but she understood that she would not get out of here alive. The only thing she could do in such a situation was to pray. At that time, Julian's mother and father noticed their absence and that both had left by car. Julian and Carolyn told their parents that they were going on a picnic together but did not specify the location. They were expected to return around 3 p.m., but the clock now read around 5 p.m. While everything could be attributed to youth and passion, Julian and Carolyn was always very responsible, was never late, especially for an extended period. Julian's mother called her son, but he didn't answer. Carolyn also ignored the calls. This was uncharacteristic for them, as they always stayed in touch. A delay of several hours seemed unthinkable, considering that they had not warned anyone that they would be late. The parents inspected the area around the house but found no traces of Julian and Carolyn. A search operation alone on such a large piece of land seemed pointless, so Julian's mother decided to return to the house and wait for them in the driveway. Suddenly, she discovered something strange. She saw a glint as from glass and found a bottle with a note inside that was stuck in the fence mesh. She read it, and its contents horrified her. Some criminal had written that he had kidnapped Julian and Carolyn. The text was full of obscene language. The criminal warned the parents not to report it to the police, otherwise, Carolyn would be burned alive, and Julian would die in agony. The kidnapper spoke of some business he had to attend to, stating that if he succeeded, the children would return home safe and sound, but only if the parents complied with all his demands. This message horrified she. Though she panicked, she was not going to follow the demands of the criminal and reported the matter to the police. Law enforcement officers immediately responded to the call and began to inspect the area, which was rugged terrain with a lot of vegetation. There was much work to be done. Relatives hoped that Julian and Carolyn had secluded themselves in the area since they rarely left Butchery. The family's situation worsened when Julian's relatives found out that both Julian's and Carolyn's families had received ominous notes. The families of Julian and Carolyn and the detectives met to discuss what had happened. Carolyn's father found a similar bottle on the porch of their house, which contained a message insisting that they not contact the police, also threatening to kill Julian and Carolyn. Even worse, he promised to deal with the entire family if his demands were violated. Everyone wondered what could possibly have motivated the hatred toward this sweet couple of young people. Initially, it was believed that that were just a cruel joke. Now the police had 2 notes, as well as the real disappearance of Julian and Carolyn. Until late in the evening, neither Julian nor Carolyn had made contact. The handwriting in both letters was identical. That means that the 2 families may have a common enemy. However, no one had the slightest idea who he might be. It was curious that the note contained a symbol that seemed to have an occult nature. Some group that considered Christians their enemies. This was considered a valuable clue, and it was quickly discovered that it was used by a certain satanic cult called the Order of Nine Angles. The history of this organization was checked and found that it had appeared in Great Britain back in the 60s, was actively luring in members in the 70s. However, the cult did not become widespread and did not have a large number of followers. Some of its members were being held accountable for extremist ideology and various threats. As the activists gained notoriety, the group opened branches in several countries around the world. Their ideology included isolating their members from the rest of society. They openly advocated for violence and committing crimes against perceived enemies, specifically targeting Christians whom they recognized as opponents to be destroyed. The most frightening aspect of this movement's activities was the propaganda promoting human sacrifices, which horrified families and prompted the police to intensify their efforts. Julian and Carolyn were simply devout Christians. Interestingly, until that point, the activities of this group had only been observed in Australia. They could potentially attempt to declare themselves by committing their first ritual murder. Satanists might use the sacrifice of Julian and Carolyn to gain fame from their began to gather like-minded people. The relatives did not receive any news for several days. Julian's car was declared wanted, but that didn't help. All the detectives' efforts proved in vain as they couldn't find either Julian and Carolyn or any leads on where to continue searching. Considering who Carolyn and Julian may have contacted, it was believed that it would be impossible to return they alive. The relatives knew that they had packed only a small amount of food meant to last a few hours. They had no worn clothes and no equipment. They did not have tents to survive the temperature fluctuations that occur in Australia during the day and night. There were also concerns about dangerous areas where Julian and Carolyn could fall victim to predators. The scorching heat and hunger posed significant threats. Even if they escaped from their kidnappers, encounters with wild or poisonous animals could be deadly. The rescue operation transitioned to a recovery effort, but this, too, yielded no results. 6 days passed during which the families of Julian and Carolyn did not find any peace. Suddenly, a message arrived: Julian and Carolyn had been found. What was most astonishing was that both were relatively safe. They had simply emerged onto the roadway near the Alpine National Park. A passing farmer stopped to help and immediately reported their situation to the police. It was not surprising that law enforcement officers were unable to find any trace of the individuals Julian and Carolyn. The national park was several hundred kilometers from where they lived, requiring about a 6-hour drive by car. Julian sustained serious injuries. While making their way through the desert, he suffered sunburn, cuts from thorny bushes, blisters, and bruises all over his body. Nonetheless, aside from the extreme stress of their ordeal, they were otherwise fine. Detectives met with Julian and Carolyn to gather information and prevent potentially dangerous criminals from operating in the area. They first communicated with Carolyn, who detailed the horrific trials she endured after being kidnapped. She described being undressed, thrown to the ground, where she lay and prayed just a few meters away from her kidnapper, who was digging in the earth. She was certain that this was her grave. This agonizing wait continued interminably until the sounds of digging stopped. Carolyn heard footsteps moving away, and everything went silent. Realizing that the criminal had abandoned her, she knew she could not remain passive. Quickly, she attempted to free herself from her ropes, but they did not yield. Her hands hurt as she rubbed them until they bled. Suddenly, she heard Julian's voice calling her name as he crawled closer. He managed to rip off her blindfold and the duct tape from her mouth. Julian, also tied up and without clothes, had managed to free his hands. This allowed Julian to finally escape and then free Carolyn. However, the danger was not over. The kidnapper could return at any moment. There was no car, but the abandoned backpack and scattered contents of the trunk remained. They found supplies that they had taken with them for a picnic, gathered everything, and fled into the thicket. They wanted to get as far away from that place as possible to plan their next steps. Along the way, Julian recounted his story. He approached an animal lying on the side of the road to examine the body, but as he leaned over, he heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind. He didn't have time to react before he was attacked. He was struck on the back of the head hard enough to lose consciousness. According to Julian, when he awoke a few hours later, he immediately began calling out for Carolyn. The criminal was no longer nearby, having escaped in an SUV. Over the next few days, they desperately tried to reach the road, making their way through thick bushes. They risked encountering wild animals, Even the slightest bite from an Australian poisonous spider or snake could be fatal. Their supplies were very limited since they had packed only a small amount of food for their picnic, specifically. During the day, Julian and Carolyn suffered from the suffocating heat, risking sunstroke. At night, they struggled to stay warm, sharing a single sleeping bag. The situation was compounded by the fear that the kidnapper could pursue them and find them at any moment. Both Julian and Carolyn were completely unaware of why this had happened to them. The situation worsened when, a few days later, they unwittingly returned to the same place where they had been held hostage. As it turned out, they had made a large circle. Nevertheless, Julian took advantage of the situation. Despite his fear of being caught, he was able to steal clothes and any remaining food, improving the dire condition of the starving couple. However, everything came to an end quickly. Carolyn fell into despair, feeling that they could not be saved, and found solace only in prayer. Finally, God heard her pleas. After 6 days, they were able to find their way out of the dense bushes. They emerged onto the road, where the police spoke to Julian, for the most part, confirmed his girlfriend's account, except for the part where he claimed to be unconscious. Julian and Carolyn was sent to stay in the hospital and then with their relatives, but law enforcement officers had no time to rest. Despite the miraculous rescue of the kidnapping victims, the armed forces still faced a real threat that the dangerous organization responsible for the kidnapping would continue its destructive activities. It had to be stopped at any cost. Before bloodshed could begin, the police decided to go to the place from which the prisoners had escaped. They found cut pieces of duct tape, clothing, a shovel, and other items, all of which were checked. To the detectives' amazement, some items belonged to Julian, including a rope found in his house's barn. There was also disturbed earth that had been dug up. The detectives discovered a balaclava, black clothing, gloves, and other things described by Carolyn. From that moment, Julian's story became even more disturbing. In particular, Julian was never able to show any signs of the head injuries he claimed to have sustained. Any such injuries should have remained visible, especially if Julian had indeed delivered a blow that could have knocked him out for several hours. They decided to talk to Julian again. From the start, the detectives made it clear that they had good reason to suspect him of kidnapping. Julian was nervous but insisted on his story, referring to his beloved, who confirmed much of what he said. However, within a few hours, he was brought to justice. Julian admitted that he had organized the kidnapping himself. He had bought the items he intended to use for the kidnapping in advance, taking some from home, including items that allowed him to hide his face from Carolyn. He had even trained for some time to tie knots that would not injure when immobilizing someone. The cult symbols used in the letters were meant to scare his parents and Carolyn's relatives into not contacting the police, preventing detective intervention. Julian deliberately used foul language in the letters he sent to the Buchwald and Watson families. No one thought he would say such words. Julian had deliberately chosen the longest route to the waterfall to avoid detection and confuse the tracks. The guy kept a lookout for anything suspicious that could attract attention and give him the opportunity to implement his plan. He eventually noticed an animal carcass on the side of the road and decided it was time to act. Julian stopped around a corner to hide from Carolyn's sight, changed his clothes, and returned to the car to play out the rest. The place he had chosen to take Carolyn was far away, allowing them to stay away from people. According to him, when Carolyn heard sounds of earth being dug up, he was actually not making a grave but getting rid of evidence. After that, he got into the car and drove away to hide it in the woods, then he returned to Carolyn. Along the way, he got rid of his clothes and wrapped ropes around his hands to make himself look like a kidnapped person. After that, he began to call her name in a weak voice, pretending that he had just regained consciousness after a blow to the head. The kidnapping was carefully planned. He had items that helped they survive this difficult period. Even the fact that they returned to the place from which they had escaped was part of the plan. However, one aspect still remained unclear. Why stage such a spectacle? 22-year-old Julian admitted that he wanted to marry Carolyn immediately. They had already been dating for 2 years, but she did not agree. 17-year-old Carolyn planned to finish school, decide on her future, go to college, get a job, become independent before finally tying the knot and starting a family. At the same time, both were devout Christians who believed in abstaining from intimate before marriage. He did not want to wait so long. He desperately wanted to satisfy his intimate desires, so he staged the kidnapping. He specifically planned everything so that they would both be isolated during their wandering through the dense thickets. Julian tried various tactics to persuade his girlfriend to be intimate. He reasoned that they might not survive this adventure, and it was worth trying intimate. He also convinced Carolyn that in the face of death, they had entered into an alliance in the fight for their lives, which he equated with marriage. Julian even tried to persuade her that they needed to engage in intimate intercourse to keep warm at night, claiming he had read about such a method somewhere. Carolyn was unwavering, continued to refuse, and insisted on her beliefs, convinced that God would save them. Therefore, his plan ultimately failed. Among the items Julian had prepared for the trip, there was a map of the national park. They had not actually gotten lost when Julian realized Carolyn was not going to give up. Therefore, he decided to lead them out of this national park. After Julian's confession, he was slapped by Carolyn, charged with kidnapping and perjury. The trial was scheduled for August 2009. Julian was not held in jail after the trial because his wealthy family posted bail. Julian took advantage of the situation and made another attempt to escape punishment. In September 2009, he obtained an Indian passport, boarded a plane, and flew to China. The document was obviously fake but of sufficient quality to fool Australian security services. Julian dyed his hair black and spent a long time sunbathing to darken his skin as much as possible, even though he was fair-skinned and required many tanning sessions. Although he managed to fly out of Australia, the Indian security services were more vigilant and refused to let him enter the country. Julian was arrested in Singapore. It was assumed that India was only the first stop on his journey and that Germany was intended to be his final destination. After that, he received a sentence of 7 years and 3 months for kidnapping, as well as an additional 6 months for escaping. He tried to challenge the court's decision, arguing that it was too harsh, but could not contest the fact that the kidnapping in this incident was a significant issue. In another unexpected turn of events, it was revealed that Julian was originally from Germany. His family had moved to Australia at an early age. In 2014, the Immigration Service considered the possibility of canceling his visa. Julian tried to resist this decision but failed. In 2016, he was deported to Germany, ending up in a country where he did not know the language at all. There were no relatives or acquaintances with whom he could start anew. His further fate is not reliably known, and there is no information about whether he went to prison. According to some sources, Julian's situation has worsened. On the other hand, Carolyn could not come to her senses for a long time after such a betrayal. It was difficult for her to learn to trust people, especially men. What happened in her life afterward is unknown. Laura Peacher, 28, was last seen on October 16, 2018, dining at a bar in Sebring. 3 days later, a restaurant employee in Tampa called 911 after finding something suspicious near a dumpster. Laura was a vibrant and social woman. She was born in Michigan in 1989, had an older sister and brother. Laura was born with a short left arm, featuring a thumb and 2 fingers. Throughout her life, she faced discrimination due to her physical difference, but she persevered and remained positive. Laura worked as a job coach at Goodwill, supporting individuals with physical and mental disabilities. Despite her own challenges, her disability was just a part of her unique character. Laura grew up in Michigan before moving to Sebring, Florida, at age 26. She relocated to assist her aging grandmother, demonstrating her caring nature by leaving her job to be there for family. On the morning of October 19, 2018, a 911 call was made by restaurant employees who discovered a woman's body near a dumpster behind their establishment. They reported a foul odor, initially suspecting it was from a dead animal. Upon closer inspection, they found what appeared to be a deceased woman. When detectives arrived, they found the victim face down, partially undressed, with a plastic bag over her head, part of the body covered by a wooden board. She was identified as Laura Peacher, wearing a dress that had been pulled down below her breasts. Her hands were tied behind her back with a purse strap. A search of the dumpster uncovered a clear plastic bag containing personal items, including mail and a wallet with an identification card. Investigators discovered that Laura was not from Tampa but lived in Sebring, Florida, roughly 2 hours away. She owned a silver Toyota Tundra pickup truck, which she likely used to travel to Tampa. However, her pickup truck was not found in the parking lot near the crime scene. It was later reported as stolen and added to a law enforcement database for recovery efforts. Investigators spoke with the restaurant manager about the situation. The restaurant owners had cleaned the parking lot just 2 days before, on Wednesday. Since Laura's body was found on Friday morning, it was likely placed there between Wednesday and Friday. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and discovered clear marks on Laura's neck, suggesting she had been strangled with a thin, rope-like object. Additional signs on her body indicated that she had been on the ground for an extended period, with noticeable discoloration of her skin. The medical examiner determined that Laura had died on Wednesday, 2 days before her body was found. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles away in Michigan, police informed Laura's family about her death. Her parents were devastated and made a 20-hour journey from Michigan to Sebring. Meanwhile, her pickup truck was still missing. The investigators knew they needed to piece together the timeline of Laura's final hours to solve the case. They aimed to uncover why Laura had traveled from Sebring to Tampa, who she had met, and the whereabouts of her pickup truck. Detectives first examined Laura's cell phone records. They found that on Wednesday, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., she received calls but stopped answering her phone, indicating something had gone wrong. The records also revealed that she made 2 calls that morning to a man. Laura's friends identified him as her boyfriend, making him the first potential suspect. Detectives wanted to speak with he to determine when he last saw Laura and whether there were any issues in their relationship. Before they could locate Laura's boyfriend, police received a tip that Laura's pickup was seen outside a convenience store in Tampa. Detectives rushed to the store, located 3 miles from where Laura's body was found. Upon arrival, they discovered that the pickup truck was no longer there. However, both the exterior and interior of the store were equipped with surveillance cameras. The detectives hoped these would provide critical information. After reviewing the camera footage, investigators saw a pickup truck arrive and park at the store. Although they attempted to zoom in for better clarity, the video quality was poor, preventing them from identifying the driver. Once parked, a man got out of the passenger seat, indicating that there were at least 2 people in the vehicle. This man seemed aware of the cameras, as he kept his head down and wore a baseball cap. He entered the store, but again, the video quality made it impossible to see his face. The man tried to steal some beer, but store employees stopped him. After leaving the store, he returned to the pickup and sat in the passenger seat, while the driver remained in the vehicle and was not visible on the cameras. About an hour later, patrol officers found Laura's pickup truck parked on the road, showing signs of a minor accident. The same man seen in the surveillance footage was sitting in the passenger seat. Upon his arrest, he identified himself as Calvin Gary. He was on probation and wearing an ankle monitor. There was no one in the driver's seat of the pickup truck, only a pair of abandoned shoes, suggesting that the driver had run away. Laura's pickup was sent to forensics for a detailed search for any evidence while detectives began interviewing Calvin. He claimed he had obtained the truck from a man known as Hot. Calvin stated that Hot had recently arrived in the neighborhood and that they had plans to steal beer from a convenience store. When detectives asked Calvin if he knew how Hot acquired the pickup, he said he did not know. He maintained that he had no information about Laura or what had happened to her. Calvin described Hot as a relatively short African-American male. He also provided detectives with Hot's location, guiding them to a specific address. Upon arriving, the detectives found Hot hiding in a bush, trying to avoid being seen, but they spotted him. They called for him to come out. When he did, he was wearing a shirt and pants but no shoes. The detectives asked the man to identify himself, but he refused to provide his name and was uncooperative. They then requested that he walk over to their pickup truck, which was equipped with technology for quick fingerprint identification. When they scanned his fingerprint, it matched a record in their database, revealing that his real name was Gary Tyrone Danielle. He had a long criminal record and had been incarcerated 3 times. Additionally, Danielle was from Sebring, the same town where Laura lived. Because he was not wearing shoes, detectives became even more suspicious that he may have been driving Laura's pickup truck. However, at that time, the police did not have sufficient evidence to charge him with a crime, so they had to release him. The investigators then focused on Calvin Gary, who, along with Gary Danielle, had driven Laura's pickup truck. Since Calvin wore a monitoring device, law enforcement could track his whereabouts. They found that he had never gone to the dumpster where Laura's body was discovered, nor had he visited Sebring, where she lived. Because of this evidence, the police ruled him out as a suspect. After interviewing Laura's boyfriend, detectives also cleared him as a suspect thanks to his solid alibi. He told them that on the evening of Tuesday, October 16th, Laura had gone to a bar in Sebring. This detail was significant since Laura had been at the bar the night before her death, prompting detectives to visit the bar and talk to the staff. The manager revealed that Laura often stopped by for a meal since she lived nearby. The last time she had been there was on the night of Tuesday, October 16th, and she appeared to be friendly and happy, with no unusual behavior noted. Detectives discovered that the establishment had surveillance cameras that recorded everything. They reviewed the footage, which confirmed the bar manager's account. Laura was wearing the same dress as when her body was found. She was sitting at the bar, chatting with a waitress, had not ordered any alcohol, and nothing unusual was happening. She only spoke to the waitress before leaving around 11 p.m. Further investigation revealed that about 4 hours after Laura left the bar, a witness saw her with a man. Around 2:45 a.m., the witness spotted her at a gas station near a convenience store on the other side of town. At that time, Laura was in her pickup truck and appeared to be fine. There were no signs that she was in distress or needed assistance. The witness also stated that Laura drove away with a man. Investigators went to the gas station where Laura was last seen and reviewed the surveillance footage. At 2:54 a.m., they saw Gary Danielle enter the store to buy cigarettes and talk to another customer before leaving. Another camera recorded Laura's pickup truck backing out of the parking lot and onto the highway. This sighting aligned with an eyewitness report stating that they saw Danielle and Laura together at the gas station near Sebring early Wednesday morning. To find clues linking Gary Danielle to Laura's murder, investigators examined items found in a dumpster. They discovered a partially torn ATM receipt that provided details leading law enforcement to a specific ATM at a gas station in Lakeland. The receipt showed a transaction occurred at 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday, 12 hours after Laura was last seen in Sebring. Detectives then visited the gas station where the ATM was located, hoping the surveillance footage would help them solve the case. After reviewing the footage, investigators located Laura's pickup truck, but they couldn't identify who was inside. Luckily, there were several cameras, and after the truck was parked, they captured Gary Danielle getting out and walking to the store. He withdrew cash from the ATM, purchased a soda, and then left the store. Laura did not get out of the truck and was never seen, leading detectives to conclude that she was likely dead by the time Danielle returned to the truck and drove toward the location where her body was eventually discovered. Danielle was taken to the police station for questioning. At that time, the police only had evidence that he had used Laura's pickup truck, so they began asking him about it. Danielle claimed that he found an unlocked truck with the keys inside and decided to take it. He stated that was the only action he took, and he had no knowledge of who owned the pickup. He mentioned that the interior of the truck appeared normal and he didn't observe anything unusual. The detectives showed Danielle a picture of Laura and asked if he recognized her. He said he did not know her. When they inquired if he had ever met Laura in Sebring, he again replied no. They informed him that they had surveillance camera footage from a gas station in Sebring that showed him with Laura. Danielle understood that the police suspected him of Laura's murder and chose not to answer any more questions. At that point, the detectives lacked physical evidence to prove to a jury that Danielle had killed Laura. There is a specific time limit for a person to stand trial, which begins when the suspect is arrested. Since the detectives were still awaiting forensic results, they decided to release Daniel, although there was a significant risk that he might flee. Forensic analysis provided substantial insights into the case. Experts discovered drops of Laura's blood in the back seat of her pickup truck. This indicates that her body was likely in the back seat at some point after her death, or that the crime occurred inside the truck. Investigators received a forensic report on items found near Laura's body, which showed DNA on the strap used to bind her hands. This DNA matched that of Daniel. Additionally, his DNA was found under Laura's fingernails. The DNA evidence and surveillance footage were sufficient to file charges, leading to Gary Daniel's arrest. At the time of his arrest, Daniel did not make any statements and chose to exercise his right to remain silent. He faced charges of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and grand theft of a motor vehicle. Using the evidence collected, investigators attempted to create a timeline of Laura's final hours. They confirmed that she had been at a bar in Sebring alone and left the bar around 11 p.m. Following that, she went to the town center, where she met friends. On that same night, she encountered Gary Daniel for the first time, with no prior relationship between them. Investigators suspect that Laura may have agreed to give Gary Daniel a ride, possibly in exchange for money. Daniel's refusal to answer questions has left investigators uncertain about how he and Laura first met. However, it is known that Laura and Daniel were seen together at a gas station, where an eyewitness confirmed that Laura appeared alive and unharmed in her pickup truck. After leaving the gas station, something occurred that led to Laura being found strangled in her truck. The exact location of the truck at the time of her death is still unknown. 12 hours after the last sighting of Laura's truck in Sebring, surveillance cameras captured it at a gas station 25 miles outside of Tampa. At that time, Daniel was withdrawing cash from an ATM. He then drove to Tampa, where he concealed Laura's body next to a dumpster in a restaurant parking lot. Her body was discovered 2 days later. The trial for Laura's murder did not begin until nearly 3 years after her death, a delay largely due to global events. Laura's father, Art Peacher, spent a long time waiting to confront the man responsible for his daughter's death in court. Rather than condemning Daniel, he chose to remember Laura by sharing a story about her kindness. Art recalled an incident where a young boy pointed out Laura's short arm, and another boy mentioned her asthma. Laura responded, "Don't you know there's something wrong with everyone?" Her father presented several items in court that belonged to his daughter, including her journal. The cover of the journal had the phrase, "Live the life you've imagined." Inside, she had written about her dislike for cooking since she lived alone and had no one to help with the dishes. She also expressed her hatred for littering and shared her thoughts about her 4 tattoos. The most significant tattoo for her was a blackbird, which was a tribute to her sister-in-law who had passed away, inspired by a song. On August 24, 2021, Gary Daniel, age 50, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a deal with state prosecutors. In return for his plea, he accepted a 30-year prison sentence. He also confessed to charges of tampering with evidence and stealing a motor vehicle. During the short court hearing, Daniel, who is bald, has a short gray beard, and was dressed in orange jail clothing and handcuffed, remained silent in the jury box and did not address Laura Peacher's family. While the guilty plea concluded the legal proceedings, it left many questions unanswered, such as the reasons behind Laura's murder and how she came to be in contact with Daniel. In 2012, a shocking double crime involving 2 young parents rocked the small community of Mountain City, Tennessee. The case of Janelle Potter serves as a haunting example of how excessive protection and control can result in devastating consequences. Janelle Potter was born on January 17, 1981, in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was the younger of 2 daughters to Marvin and Barbara Potter. Barbara was a secretary at a small retail company, while Marvin was a former Marine. Janelle grew up with her older sister, Christy, who was 6 years older. However, their relationship was complicated and tense, largely due to their parents' approach to parenting. Janelle was born prematurely and was fragile and often sick from an early age. Her parents were overly protective of her, treating her with extreme care, allowing her to do whatever she wanted as long as she remained happy and smiled. In contrast, Christy was expected to help care for Janelle, often assuming the role of caretaker instead of that of a sibling. As she grew older, Christy began to resist this unfair expectation, desiring her own time and space. When she pushed back against this imbalance, she faced scolding and discipline from their parents. In the Potter family, Janelle was the focal point. She received constant praise and was treated like a princess, leading her to believe she was truly exceptional. On the other hand, her parents tightly controlled every aspect of her life from a young age, trying to shield her from even minor mistakes or risks. As a result, Janelle grew up in an emotional bubble, missing the chance to learn from experiences and face the natural consequences of her actions. As Janelle grew older, her parents gradually neglecting Christy. Christy became somewhat invisible, left to navigate life on her own and struggling to gain any of her parents' attention. Despite her hard work in school, achieving top grades, and excelling in sports, her accomplishments were often overlooked or dismissed. Nothing she did seemed to matter. In contrast, Janelle was fully aware that she was the favorite. Even as a child, she began to test limits, only to discover that there were none for her. She frequently lied, with no consequences. If something was broken, she would blame it on Christy, and their parents would believe her without question. Christy often faced scolding or punishment, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. At the age of 10, Janelle was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, leading her parents to become extremely controlling and protective. Barbara took the lead in this overprotectiveness, while her father, Marvin, mostly supported Barbara's decisions. Janelle was forbidden to play outside with other children or go anywhere on her own. When she began school, Janelle found it difficult to keep up with her studies. Her teachers noticed that she seemed disengaged, inattentive, and unmotivated. However, her parents refused to acknowledge this issue. Instead, they attributed her struggles to her health problems or suggested that her teachers were biased against her. They never reprimanded her for poor academic performance and continually reassured her that schoolwork wasn't very important. Janelle struggled to fit in at school, often getting into conflicts with her classmates. She would create stories, play tricks, and always shifting the blame onto someone else. Barbara and Marvin frequently visited the school, advocating for Janelle to be treated as special and demanding that her needs be prioritized. Many people saw Janelle as spoiled and difficult to handle. Teachers even suggested she should be suspended or expelled due to her constant disruptions, but her parents remained blind to her behavior. They believed it was always someone else's fault. In contrast, Christy graduated with honors and was accepted into a reputable college, but her parents failed to celebrate her achievements. In fact, they seemed to overlook her completely, focusing all their attention on Janelle. Taking control of her own life, Christy got a job while studying, moved out, and became financially independent. She was tired of being blamed and gradually distanced herself from her family. As Janelle grew older, she became more selfish, unapproachable. She constantly started fights, made demands, and complained. She rarely went anywhere without her mother, who always defended her, regardless of the situation, and wasn't afraid to confront anyone who questioned her daughter. The Potters were not well liked in their quiet suburban neighborhood. Many viewed them as strange, and some even felt sorry for Janelle, believing that her mother's excessive control had harmed her emotional health. However, most neighbors chose to keep their distance to avoid any conflict. Janelle graduated from high school with a below-average GPA, making college impractical, but this did not concern Barbara. She reassured Janelle that studying or working wasn't necessary, as they could fully support her. Janelle was content with that. Her days were spent watching TV and using the computer, with no limits on her screen time. Even in her 20s, her parents controlled every aspect of her life. She wasn't allowed to socialize with friends, date, or even drive. As a result, Janelle had no friends, lacked basic social skills, and was unable to make her own decisions. She did not understand the consequences of her actions or have a sense of personal responsibility. Barbara and Marvin justified their behavior as acts of love and protection, pointing to Janelle's delicate health. Janelle accepted this and enjoyed her freedom from responsibility. Her parents consistently praised and shielded her, regardless of the situation. In 2005, the Potter family chose to move to Mountain City, a small, peaceful town in Tennessee with a population of just over 3,000. In this town, almost everyone knew one another, and the crime rate was very low. It appeared to be the ideal place for a quiet and relaxed life. They purchased a modest yet comfortable home in a tranquil residential area. The newcomers quickly attracted the attention of the locals, who dropped by to introduce themselves, offered assistance, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know the family. Initially, everything went well. Barbara even made a few friends among the neighbors. However, it wasn't long before people began to notice strange behavior from the family. The adult daughter, Janelle, initially came across as polite and friendly, but if anyone disagreed with her or made the slightest critique, she would have dramatic outbursts or emotional breakdowns. Her mother would immediately leap to Janelle's defense without asking what had happened. Marvin became a regular at local hangouts, often seen enjoying a drink while sharing exaggerated stories about his supposed heroic military past. Many of these tales were either greatly embellished or entirely fabricated, and the townspeople quickly picked up on this. Nevertheless, they treated him kindly and jokingly referred to him as the local storyteller. Janelle wanted to make friends but struggled. Eventually, she devised a way to gain attention by portraying herself as a person in need of sympathy. She started telling people that she was seriously ill, claiming to suffer from various debilitating and incurable diseases. At one point, she even said she had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and didn't have much time left. People believed her and felt compassion for someone they thought was facing the end of her life. However, as time went on and she mentioned new, unrelated ailments, people began to grow suspicious. Eventually, many realized her stories didn't seem to fit together. By the late 2000s, social media became very popular, serving as a platform for making new friends, reconnecting with old ones, and finding romantic partners. Janelle, who was mostly homebound, created profiles on several social media sites and spent hours online each day. The internet became her main connection to the outside world, giving her a sense of having a social life. She filled her profiles with made-up information about herself, bragging about false achievements, fictional hobbies, and an exciting lifestyle. She was remarkably creative in crafting these personas. Janelle downloaded photos from the internet, images from parties and concerts, choosing those where people's faces were hidden by colorful lights or shadows. She edited each picture with filters and added captions that made it seem like she had attended those events. At times, she would even write detailed posts about the events she claimed to have been at, complete with names, locations, and vivid descriptions. Her posts were surprisingly convincing. Soon, Janelle gained popularity on social media, attracting followers who didn't know her in real life and believed her stories of parties, travel, and adventures. She sent out hundreds of friend requests daily, and her profile soon accumulated thousands of followers. Every post and photo received many likes and positive comments, boosting her ego. She created an entirely fictional world where she was admired, successful, and surrounded by loving friends. However, as time passed, Janelle felt that something was missing. She realized her carefully constructed online persona lacked a romantic plot. Without hesitation, she created a fake profile, this time pretending to be a man. She followed the same approach of using appealing photos from the internet, editing them, and sharing them as if they were her own. This new account also gained popularity, eventually attracting over 1,000 followers. Janelle began sharing the same party photos from both of her profiles, tagging the same places to give the impression that she and a fictitious companion were attending events together. To enhance this illusion, she complimented herself in the comments, shared poems, and wrote heartfelt messages that were all carefully curated for her followers. Some of her followers even expressed envy, commenting on how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful romantic partner. During this time, Janelle also became a member of a local online community, similar to a town forum where residents of Mountain City shared news, updates, and thoughts about events. The platform allowed for anonymity, Many users chose nicknames while some used their real names. Janelle occasionally read through discussions but rarely engaged in posting. She found it less appealing because she couldn't project an image of popularity or shine like she did on social media. The people here knew her personally and were aware of her true reputation, which some found unusual. As Janelle approached her 30s, she finally made her first true friend, Tracy Greenwell, who had grown up in Mountain City. Tracy worked at a local pharmacy. She was recognized for her intelligence, being well-read and easy to converse with. With Tracy, Janelle began to explore the outside world more. They enjoyed activities like shopping at the mall, walking in the park, hanging out at cafes, and talking on the phone every day. For the first time, Janelle's parents approved of her friendship and even welcomed Tracy into their home. Janelle flourished in this new, supportive dynamic. She finally felt heard. Janelle no longer felt the need to exaggerate or manipulate to gain attention. For the first time, someone was truly interested in her, which was a new and comforting experience. Tracy eventually introduced Janelle to her larger circle of family and friends, and soon they were spending time not just one-on-one, but as part of a larger group. Among these friends was Tracy's stepbrother, Billy Payne. He was young, well-educated, handsome, and had a great sense of humor, naturally drawing attention wherever he went. Janelle was immediately attracted to him and felt genuine romantic feelings for the first time, but unfortunately, the feelings weren't reciprocated. Janelle didn't know how to flirt or express affection casually. Instead, she sought attention and became visibly upset when it wasn't given. Her intense and erratic behavior pushed Billy away. He began to see her as unusual, keeping his distance. As Janelle's feelings grew stronger, she became increasingly obsessed. She sent Billy affectionate messages on social media and began showing up wherever he was. Despite her efforts, Billy continued to distance himself. About 6 weeks later, he publicly announced that he was in a relationship with a woman, Billie Jean Hayworth, introducing her to their friend group as his girlfriend. Following this, Billy stopped spending time with the group and focused entirely on his new relationship. Janelle was struggling emotionally, acting as if someone had taken away a treasured possession. She became erratic and demanding, begging Tracy to intervene between her brother and his girlfriend. However, this only created a rift between the two friends. Around the same time, news spread that Billy and Billy were engaged, and the community viewed them as a perfect couple. Their relationship became a popular topic, even on the town's local chat forum, with everyone seemingly supportive, except for Janelle. To her, it felt as if someone had stolen the love of her life, deepening her sense of loss into resentment, which soon turned into a desire for revenge. Eventually, Janelle made amends with her friend Tracy and asked for help in finding a new romantic partner. Tracy connected her with her cousin, Jamie Curd. Jamie was 7 years older than Janelle and worked as a tech specialist for a local company. He had struggled with relationships in the past, as many found him somewhat awkward and withdrawn. While they might have seemed like a reasonable match on paper, Janelle had different intentions. Janelle was concerned that her parents wouldn't approve of her dating someone much older, so she devised a strategy. She invited Jamie over, pretending to need assistance with her computer, setting it up, fixing issues, or installing software. Each time he came over, she praised him in front of her parents, making it clear how valuable his help was. Eventually, Barbara and Marvin invited Jamie to stay for dinner, and after that, he became a regular guest in their home. A month later, Janelle confided in her mother that she had feelings for Jamie. With her mother's support, she quickly moved forward. Just a few days later, Janelle and Jamie officially became a couple and started spending a lot of time together. However, Janelle didn't genuinely care for Jamie. She was using their relationship to provoke jealousy in Billy. Unfortunately, her plan backfired, as Billy showed no interest. In her continued efforts to get Billy's attention, Janelle managed to get invited to a family dinner at Tracy's house. She arrived holding Jamie's hand, clearly trying to make a statement, but she faced an unexpected shock. During the dinner, Billy announced that he and his girlfriend were getting married and that they were expecting a baby. This news struck Janelle like a bolt of lightning. her hopes were dashed, and soon, a darker plan began to take shape in her mind. Just days later, harmful rumors began to spread on Mountain City's local chat forum. Anonymous posts accused Billie Jean Hayworth of living irresponsibly, claiming she had been involved with many men and had previously been treated for a serious health issue. The post suggested she was now deceiving Billie into thinking he was the father of her baby. None of this was true, but in a small town, gossip spreads quickly, and people enjoy discussing it. Someone was clearly stoking the flames, adding new accusations to keep the thread active. Soon, Billie was subjected to open insults and harsh criticism online. Despite the wave of negativity and public scrutiny, Billie supported her. He didn't believe the rumors and refused to abandon her. They both attempted to defend Billie's reputation, but it became evident that responding on social media was futile. They then reported the harassment to law enforcement. At that point, they had no idea who was behind it. Even though the forum allowed users to remain anonymous, local investigators soon traced the source of the smear campaign. When the truth emerged, the couple quickly applied for a restraining order against Janelle, prohibiting her from contacting them. However, this was just the start of a much larger conflict. Feeling trapped, Janelle created several fake social media accounts. Using these accounts, she sent herself intimidating messages and threats of violence. She then showed these messages to her parents, claiming she feared for her safety, believed that Billie wanted to harm her. Barbara and Marvin completely trusted their daughter's words. The family approached the police again, but this time, the officers traced the messages and discovered they had been sent by Janelle herself. Nevertheless, her parents refused to accept this evidence and continued to believe that their daughter was the victim. The conflict between Janelle and the couple intensified into a prolonged feud. Whenever Billie encountered any member of the Potter family in town, it often resulted in a heated argument filled with yelling, accusations, insults, and even threats. Both sides filed multiple police reports and sought restraining orders against each other. This back and forth lasted nearly a year. Eventually, things seemed to settle down. The disputes stopped appearing in the town forum. However, Janelle had actually changed her approach and was preparing to take action without the public conflict. During this time, Barbara began receiving emails from someone claiming to be a CIA operative named Chris. He warned her that credible intelligence suggested Billie were planning to harm Janelle. Although there wasn't enough solid evidence to make arrests, he indicated that the threat was real. He also communicated with Marvin and Jamie, stressing that Janelle was in serious danger, urging them to act quickly to prevent any harm. Remarkably, within just a few weeks, this mysterious agent gained the trust of Janelle's parents and her boyfriend. Together, they began constantly messaging each other, believing they were formulating a plan to protect Janelle's life. About a month later, the operative alerted them that Billie were actively seeking someone to execute their supposed plan. He warned that time was running out and provided a detailed step-by-step guide on what needed to be done. Early in the morning on January 31, 2012, Jamie and Marvin followed the agent's instructions and drove to the home where Billie Jean, and their 7-month-old son, Tyler, were asleep, unaware of the impending danger. Jamie and Marvin entered through a first-floor window, proceeded to the couple's bedroom. Marvin was armed with a handgun he had brought from home. He approached the bed quietly and shot Billie point-blank, killing him instantly. The noise startled Billie Jean, who jumped out of bed in confusion and panic. She rushed to the nursery to grab her son, trying to escape to safety, but the men pursued her. Just as she picked up her baby, she was attacked twice in the head, killing her before she could reach the door. Remarkably, little Tyler survived the incident. Although he was traumatized, he did not suffer any serious injuries. After the violent incident, Marvin and Jamie quickly escaped the location. Neighbors, disturbed by the gunfire, promptly called emergency services. Authorities arrived within minutes. Inside the house, they discovered a tragic scene. One room contained the body of Billie, who had been shot in the head, while another room had a small child sitting in a pool of blood next to his deceased mother, Billie. Almost immediately, evidence pointed investigators to the Potter household, who a long-standing feud with the victims had been ongoing for years. The day after the murders, Johnson County Sheriff's Deputy Joe Woodard spoke with Janelle, Barbara, and Marvin at their home, and they recorded the incident. During the interview, Janelle appeared to be hiding her romantic relationship with Jamie from her parents. Later that week, authorities brought Jamie in and asked him to take a lie detector test, which showed he had lied about knowing the identity of Billy and Billy's killers. Lott said, during the interview, Jamie said something like, "Is the CIA here?" That's a very strange question for him. In a major breakthrough, Jamie told detectives that he had been texting with a man named Chris, who said he worked for the CIA and that his job was to protect Janelle at all costs. After nearly 6 hours of questioning, Jamie told police that Janelle's father, Marvin, had killed Billy and Billy. Detectives asked Jamie to call Marvin to record a confession. Police then moved in and arrested Marvin in a pre-dawn raid in February 2012. When questioned by detectives, Marvin said, "Ever since this whole thing started, his life has been in danger. His wife has been in danger. They threatened to take Janelle and cut her head off." Agent Lott then arranged for Marvin to call his wife, Barbara. That conversation was close to a confession. While Marvin was being questioned, police executed a search warrant at Potter's home. Deputy Chief Woodard said investigators found an arsenal of weapons around the house, although none of them matched the murder weapon. They also discovered printed photos of the victim and her friends in the living room. At one point, Barbara tore up the photos in what appeared to be an effort to hide them from police. Authorities seized 51 items from the home, including the family computer. When they seized Marvin's truck, they found bags of shredded documents, pictured above. An agent painstakingly recreated more than 100 pages of the thousands of emails sent to the Potter family. After looking at it closely, it seems like there's some kind of conspiracy going on here. They keep mentioning a guy named Chris who's supposed to be a CIA agent or something, Agent Lott said. CIA agent Chris apparently corresponded with Barbara, warning her of threats to her daughter's life. He was tracking people he said were harassing her on the computer and calling her. And when she was out with her dad, he said they were tracking them together, Barbara said. He said he couldn't use his real name, his real identity. Police also focused on text messages between Janelle and Jamie on the morning of the murder. Text messages showed Janelle was involved in the preparation for the murder, prosecutor Dennis Brooks said. And on the Potter family's computer, police analyzed hundreds of emails sent by CIA agent Chris from the same IP address as the home where the Potters lived. Brooks believes Janelle pretended to be Chris. Social media allowed Janelle Potter to be someone she wasn't. She created Chris. She could take on a different identity and be as hateful as she wanted, Brooks said. Prosecutors believe Janelle used the fake identity to trick her parents and incite Marvin to kill. She fed Barbara's delusions, so Barbara ignored signs that something was wrong. In August 2013, authorities arrested Janelle and Barbara for the murders of Payne and Hayworth. Jamie agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided a detailed account of the events leading up to the attack, claiming he genuinely thought he was protecting the woman he loved and had no knowledge of Chris's true identity. In October 2013, Marvin Potter, who executed the fatal shootings, was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms, while Jamie testified against him and reached a deal of 25 years in prison. In July 2015, Barbara was found guilty of helping with the plan and was sentenced to life in prison. Janelle, the mastermind behind the scheme, believed she could manipulate everyone and escape without punishment, but her complex plan ultimately failed. She was convicted of orchestrating a violent crime and was sentenced to life behind bars. In trying to portray herself as the victim, she ended up using those closest to her as pawns, leading to the loss of 2 innocent lives. Judge Blackwood said the killings were the most senseless he had seen in his decades as a judge. Tyler is in the care of his family, who are still struggling to come to terms with the loss. He will never remember his mother, who was murdered while holding him. Janelle will be 80 before she is considered for parole, Blackwood said, and Barbara and Marvin will die behind bars. Now the people of Mountain City just want to forget. No one wants to talk about these murders anymore, but the scars are still there. People now lock their doors at night when they never did before. This has shocked the community.
In 1994, the discovery of 5 lifeless bodies inside a large house in New Zealand became one of the strangest and most expensive criminal cases the country had ever faced. David Bain was the eldest son and the only survivor of the incident. Shockingly, David was later charged with 5 counts of murder, accused of killing his entire family. He was only 22 years old at the time. But if you think that's where the story ends, think again. 19 years later, David walked free, and the reason why is astonishing. It's one of those cases that makes you question everything. Trust me, you'll want to grit your teeth and hang on until the very end. But before we dive into the shocking twists and turns, let's first take a closer look at the Bain family, the people at the heart of this chilling mystery. By all appearances, the Bain family seemed like a typical religious family. David Cullen Bain was born on March 27, 1972, the first child of Robin Bain and Margaret Bain. His parents had married 3 years earlier. In 1969, they were deeply rooted in their faith, hoping for a peaceful, close-knit family life. But life had other plans. When David was 2 years old, Robin felt called to be a missionary teacher, so the family moved far away from home. The Bains uprooted their lives and moved over 3,000 miles northwest to Papua New Guinea. It was a massive change, from the familiar streets of New Zealand to the tropical and often challenging environment of a remote island nation. Their family grew. David became the eldest of 4 siblings, with 2 sisters, Arawa and Laniette, born 3 and 4 years after him. A younger brother, Stephen, arriving 8 years later. In many ways, this should have been a time of joy and growth, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. While Robin threw himself into his missionary work, Margaret's spiritual path began to shift. She became fascinated by New Age spiritualism and the idea of channeling spirits, a stark contrast to the traditional religious values the family was raised with. Margaret became convinced that their family was under threat from dark, satanic forces, and fiercely believed that they needed protection from these evil influences. This obsession caused stress and fear at home, creating a sense of discomfort that intensified as time passed. Additionally, Robin's enthusiasm for his missionary work started to fade after several years. The dream that had brought the family to Papua New Guinea began to lose its luster. By 1988, 14 years after their move, they returned to New Zealand. The family settled into a large house in Anderson's Bay, a quiet suburb on New Zealand's South Island. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but life at home was far from peaceful. In 1991, Robin took a job as the principal of a small rural school. On paper, this sounded promising: a stable job, a chance to rebuild a community. But things were deteriorating rapidly. By 1994, the marriage between Robin and Margaret was hanging by a thread. They argued constantly, daily fights that wore down the family's spirit. Margaret's bitterness toward Robin had deepened so much that she reportedly made chilling comments about wanting to kill him. The tension was strong, and they could feel it both emotionally and in the atmosphere of their home. Visitors described the Bain household as a pigsty. The once grand house had become run down and neglected. Broken windows, peeling paint, and clutter filled every corner. Unpleasant smells lingered in the air, a testament to the family's neglect and disarray. Robin was rarely there to help. During the week, he lived and slept in a caravan near the school, miles away from the chaos at home. On weekends, instead of joining the family inside, he stayed in another caravan parked in the garden. The emotional distance between the family members only grew wider. Worse, dark rumors swirled around Robin. There were whispers and accusations of abuse towards his youngest daughter. And yet, these claims cast a shadow over the family and would later become a key element in the case that shocked the nation. On the other hand, David's relationship with his father was tense and strained. In contrast, he was very close to his mother, Margaret, and they often shared grievances about Robin, united in their frustrations. At 22 years old in 1994, David was trying to find his way. He was a music student with dreams of becoming an opera singer, an ambitious goal that set him apart from the typical path his siblings were on. Whether or not he had the talent for international fame is up for debate, but David's passion for music was real. Now, despite the turmoil at home, all four Bain children were involved in school or work. Arawa was training to be a teacher, Stephen was finishing high school, and Laniet held a part-time job. However, David's path was a little more complicated. After struggling to fit in at university, he had dropped out for a time and even relied on unemployment benefits. But he eventually returned to university to study classical music, supporting himself by delivering newspapers in the early mornings, a humble job that required discipline and grit. By 1994, the bond between Robin and Margaret was not just broken, it was shattered beyond repair. Margaret had become really convinced that Robin was possessed by a demon she called Balil. She also referred to her husband as a son of Balil, one of the four crowned princes of hell. This wasn't some passing thought or simple fear, it was something she wrote about repeatedly in her diary, describing how she believed her husband was under the control of an evil spirit, that it cast a dark shadow over their home and tore the family apart. Margaret's attempts to rid Robin of this demon often took the form of exorcisms, rituals meant to drive the evil out. Robin's mental health suffered immensely under this strain. Colleagues at his school described him as a man who was depressed, withdrawn, and barely functioning, like a shell of the person he once was. Neglecting his own hygiene and appearing almost robotic, Robin seemed lost, trapped in a life that was falling apart around him. Meanwhile, the children found themselves caught in the middle of this toxic environment. David, Arawa, Laniet, and Stephen each had their own complicated relationships with their parents and with each other. Some children sided more with their mother, others were closer to their father. The house, already cluttered and chaotic, was filled with tension and emotional pain. It was clear that the family was on the brink of collapse. And then, on the morning of Monday, June 20th, 1994, the unimaginable happened. At exactly 7:09 in the morning, David Bain made a frantic call to emergency services. All dead. They're all dead. I can't believe they're all dead. David trying to explain what he had found in his own home. When police arrived, they were confronted with a scene so grim and tragic that it was almost unimaginable. David's mother, sisters, and youngest brother were all dead. His father lay in the lounge, a bullet wound to the head. The family rifle was on the floor beside him, and chillingly, a typed message on the computer read, "Sorry, you are the only one who deserves to stay." The family home was a mess, as usual, but now it was stained with loss and violence. All 5 members of the Bain family were dead, victims of a brutal shooting that shocked the entire nation. The question everyone wanted answered was, who did this and why? In the days following the massacre, more evidence emerged that suggested Robin, the father, might have been innocent after all. Remarkably, the only blood found on him was his own. There was none on his clothes, socks, or shoes which he had been wearing that day. This was puzzling because if Robin had been the killer and had then shot himself, one would expect at least some transfer of blood to his clothing or hands. Moreover, Robin's fingerprints were completely absent from the rifle found beside him, a fact that forensic experts found hard to reconcile. If Robin had fired the fatal shots and then turned the weapon on himself, his fingerprints should have been all over the gun. To complicate matters further, no gunpowder residue was detected on his hands, a forensic detail that contradicted the idea of him taking his own life. The initial theory seemed clear. The father, Robin, had killed his family before taking his own life. But this explanation quickly began to unravel. Forensic experts examined the bullet wound in Robin's head and declared it nearly impossible that he had shot himself. The trajectory and angle of the bullet, along with the blood patterns, suggested his body had been moved after death, casting doubt on the father theory. This twist in the investigation shifted suspicion towards David Bain. If Robin wasn't the killer, then why was David alive when everyone else in his family was dead? Why had he been spared to add to the growing mystery? David's story just didn't quite add up. When officers first questioned him, he explained that he had completed his usual newspaper round between 6 and 6:42 in the morning. This timeline seemed straightforward enough, and a neighbor even confirmed to police that they saw David entering the Bain property at around 6:40 a.m. But here's where things get strange. David didn't call for help until 7:09 a.m., a full 24 minutes after he supposedly returned home. What happened during that gap? When interrogated, David admitted he zoned out, unsure of what to do or how to react to the horror inside his own house. This delay immediately raised red flags for investigators, who wondered if something was being left out of his story. Adding more complexity to the case, David was unable to explain the fresh injuries on his forehead and knees. These wounds suggested some kind of recent struggle or accident, but he had no clear explanation. Even more incriminating was the fact that the gun found next to Robin's body actually belonged to David. He further admitted he was the only person who knew where the key to unlock the gun's safety mechanism was kept, making him the prime suspect in the eyes of the police. With this mounting suspicion, it didn't take long for the authorities to detain David. Merely 4 days after the horrific massacre, he was arrested and charged with the murders of his entire family. Digital forensics played a crucial role in unraveling the tangled timeline of that tragic morning. It was discovered that the computer on which the final letter was typed had been switched on at 6:44 a.m., just 2 minutes after David reportedly arrived home. This suggested that the note had been composed shortly after his return, seemingly placing him at the scene during the time of the killings. Despite all the mounting evidence casting doubt on Robin's guilt, the investigation took a dark turn just 17 days after the murders. The Bain family's relatives, deeply unsettled by the gruesome scene, decided to take drastic action. Relatives, worried about teenagers breaking in and accidentally causing a fire or other problems, asked for the house to be deliberately burned down in a safe, controlled manner. The decision was approved by David himself, who agreed to this controversial move. While it might seem illogical to burn down a crime scene, the family and authorities wanted to prevent further tragedy or vandalism. Within minutes, the old wooden Bain family home was engulfed in roaring flames. The blaze quickly consumed the house, erasing the physical space where such a horrific tragedy had unfolded. The house was consumed by towering flames for more than an hour. The fire could be seen over most of the city. It burned 17 days after Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen were killed, along with parents Robin and Margaret. Still, with the house now reduced to ashes, the investigators could only rely on the evidence they had already gathered. No further forensic work could be done on the physical crime scene, as it no longer existed. How the family managed to get permission to burn down a crime scene so fast, or why anyone even thought it was a good idea, remains a total mystery. Despite all this, the wheels of justice kept turning. Almost 1 year to the day after the massacre, in May of 1995, David's trial finally began. Prosecutors came well prepared and carefully reconstructed a timeline of the horrific morning. According to their version, David woke at 5 a.m. to the familiar buzz of his alarm clock. After dressing, he put on a pair of white opera gloves, a strange and unsettling choice, and retrieved his rifle. Along with the ammunition from his wardrobe, using a spare key, he unlocked the gun's trigger lock, effectively readying himself for what would become a brutal and bloody spree. David systematically shot his mother, then his 2 sisters, and finally his younger brother. During a violent struggle with his brother Stephen, David lost a lens from his glasses and suffered several injuries himself. Blood from the victims soaked into David's clothes, a damning detail prosecutors emphasized to prove his involvement. Trying to cover his tracks, David supposedly threw the bloodied clothes into the washing machine, started a cycle, took a shower, and changed into fresh, clean clothes. These actions explain the pools of blood found scattered throughout the laundry room and bathroom, places no one would expect unless someone was desperately trying to erase evidence. After this cleanup, David reportedly went about his usual morning routine, leaving the house at 5:45 a.m. to deliver newspapers as if nothing was wrong. Upon returning home at approximately 6:42 a.m., he went upstairs and switched on the computer at 6:44 a.m., then typed a message. Then he waited for his father, Robin, to return. Robin was known to enter the house from his caravan at exactly 7 a.m. every morning to pray, and tragically, that day was no different. Prosecutors argued that David hid behind a curtain in the lounge, silently waiting for Robin to nearby. At that precise moment, he shot his father at point-blank range. Only then did he make the call to emergency services, feigning shock and despair. This call coincided with the 24-minute gap. David claimed he had zoned out, unsure of what to do next. Afterward, David allegedly staged the scene to make it look like Robin had taken his own life. But David tells a completely different story. He told the court that he had gotten up at his usual time, prepared for his paper route, and left the house with his dog. Upon returning around 6:42 a.m., he went straight to his room, took off his shoes, and went downstairs to wash his hands. While he admitted putting his clothes into the washing machine, he denied they had any blood on them. Heading back upstairs, he claimed he noticed bullets and the rifle's trigger lock lying on the floor. Frantically, he searched the house and found his mother, sisters, and brother all dead in their bedrooms. His father was also dead, lying in the lounge. According to David, he then zoned out for about 20 minutes before finally calling emergency services. Additionally, David's defense team proposed a shocking alternative, that Robin, the father, was actually the killer. According to their theory, Robin had killed his family before turning on the computer to type a message and then had taken his own life. It was a bold claim, but several parts of David's story just didn't add up. The prosecution, meanwhile, argued that David's motive was financial. They claimed he wanted to inherit the family fortune. His parents had put away a large sum of money intended for a new house. When the trial ended, David Bain was found guilty on all 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 16 years. Now, you might think the story ends there. A horrific family massacre, an obvious suspect, and a clear sentence. Case closed, but you'd be wrong. Over the months and years that followed, David Bain's case captivated many. News of the Bain family massacre spread like wildfire across the nation, and public opinion was sharply divided on who was truly to blame. One of David's most vocal supporters was Joe Karam, a former All Black rugby star. After retiring from professional sports, Joe developed a deep interest in the case during his more relaxed years. Convinced of David's innocence, Joe became an outspoken advocate. Following David's sentencing, Joe visited him over 200 times in prison. He even wrote 4 books about the case, tirelessly researching and pressuring the justice system for a review. His efforts eventually led to a major breakthrough, an appeal to the Privy Council. This appeal, which began in May 2007, 12 years after David's initial imprisonment, was a monumental moment. The Privy Council, based in London, found that a serious miscarriage of justice had occurred. They ordered David's convictions to be quashed and scheduled a new trial. The council argued there was significant doubt David would have been convicted if crucial evidence, discovered after the original trial, had been presented to the jury. Much of this new evidence was information the jury had never even heard. For example, Dean Cottle, a friend of Laniet, revealed something explosive. According to Dean, Laniet had confided in him about an incestuous relationship with her father, Robin. Just days before the massacre, she had traveled home to confront the family with this horrific secret. This testimony suggested a possible motive for Robin, but the judge, in the original trial, ruled Dean's evidence as hearsay and labeled him an unreliable witness. As a result, this crucial information was suppressed and never reached the jury. As time passed, even more disturbing facts came to light. Robin had reportedly published brutal and sadistic stories written by his pupils in a school newsletter. One of these stories even involved a fictional family massacre. A 46-page document detailed the many wrongdoings of the first trial, painting a clear picture of its inherent unfairness. None of this information was available to the jury in 1995, meaning David's defense team couldn't properly shift suspicion towards Robin. Consequently, David was granted bail and allowed to remain out of prison while awaiting the new trial. This brief taste of freedom, after spending over a decade behind bars, must have felt almost surreal. For 3 months, he lived with Joe Karam and then moved to Auckland. This fleeting liberty was likely a bittersweet experience, shadowed by the heavy knowledge that his nightmare was far from over. 2 years later, in March 2009, David's retrial commenced, forcing him and everyone connected to the case to relive the horrors once again. David pleaded not guilty to the 5 murder charges. Again, his defense argued that Robin, the father, was the true killer who had then turned the gun on himself. This time, however, the defense brought forward far more compelling evidence, suggesting why Robin might have committed such a chilling act. They detailed Robin's descent into a deep and morbid depression, his alarming behavior that concerned colleagues and friends, and most importantly, they uncovered the secret at the heart of it all, Laniette's dark and hidden truth, which she was allegedly ready to reveal to the family just before the massacre. This secret, steeped in horror and despair, painted a picture of a man pushed to the edge by desperation and shame. The retrial dragged on for 3 grueling months, filled with testimony, arguments, and re-examinations of every detail. Yet, despite the lengthy process, the jury's decision was astonishingly swift. Less than a day after deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict of not guilty. After spending 13 years in prison and 2 additional years under legal suspicion, David Bain was finally free. Since then, he has lived outside the prison walls, rebuilding his life piece by piece. However, the case continues to divide opinions sharply. There are still many details that make it hard for some to accept David's innocence. His bloody fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. Fresh injuries appeared on his body with no explanation, and Stephen's blood was discovered on clothes David had washed and denied having stained. What about the mysterious 20 minutes David claimed to have zoned out for? How does one explain that lapse during such a horrific day? More tellingly, experts have widely agreed that the angle of Robin's fatal wound made it almost impossible for him to have taken his own life. So, if Robin didn't kill himself, then who was responsible? Adding to the suspicion is the fact that David gave permission to burn down the family home, the very scene of the murders. To many, that act alone speaks volumes. Even David's girlfriend at the time said he had a premonition something terrible was about to happen shortly before the killings, which seems too coincidental to ignore. Yet, on the flip side, there are equally convincing reasons to believe Robin might have been the true culprit. Robin was reportedly deeply unhappy with his life, and if Laniette's secret was true, he could have been overwhelmed with panic and fear. Shell casings were found in his caravan, and the disturbing, sadistic stories revealed by his colleagues painted the portrait of a man unraveling mentally and emotionally. This case remains one of New Zealand's most polarizing, sparking intense debate over who truly committed the murders. The financial cost of this case was staggering. Taxpayers shelled out over $7 million, with the retrial alone costing more than $4 million, making it the most expensive trial in New Zealand's history. Joe Karam, David's unwavering advocate, lost over $500,000 personally supporting the cause. David himself sought compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Given the high-profile nature of the case, New Zealand's Justice Minister brought in overseas judges to review the application. The review recommended compensation, but bureaucratic delays meant that the case was handed back and forth between ministers. 6 long years of red tape and delays passed before David was finally awarded $925,000 in 2016. During all this turmoil, David rebuilt his life. He found work as an engineer, fell in love, married, had a child, and legally changed his name. Rumor has it that the family eventually moved to Australia, perhaps to escape the long shadow cast by the case. As for the Bain family home, no trace remains of the original property that was burned down in 1994. The site has since been completely transformed into a landscaped, modern 3-bedroom house, erasing the physical memory of what happened there. Over the decades, the story of the Bain family massacre and all its related evidence has faded into the distant past, becoming almost like a dark legend whispered about but rarely confronted.
Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Mike and Missy McIvor. During a tropical storm in the Florida Keys, Missy McIvor and Mike were murdered in their home. Missy was 9 months pregnant at the time, which made the case especially heartbreaking not only for the police investigating, but also for the entire state of Florida today. We explore this shocking murder. Susan Michelle Emil, also known as Missy, was born on July 24, 1962, in Titusville, Pennsylvania, from a young age. She had the ability to draw others in. She had a warm smile, a caring nature, and a kind heart. Missy had a deep love for children, which she pursued by becoming an elementary school teacher, a dream she cherished and worked hard to achieve. Mike McIvor was born on April 15, 1961, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His parents had a deep passion for airplanes, a relatively new invention at the time. His mother worked as a flight attendant, while his father was an airline captain for Mike's family. Airplanes were not only a source of income, but also a shared love. Many childhood photos show Mike disassembling and reassembling planes with his family. Mike pursued his passion from childhood all the way to his career and eventually became a professional pilot. In 1987, he met a girl named Missy, and he fell in love with her immediately. They first laid eyes on each other at a nightclub and talked non-stop all night. They felt like they were destined to be together. So they decided to start a serious relationship. 2 years later, Mike and Missy moved to Key Largo, where they bought a spacious house in May 1990. They got married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Everyone who witnessed their marriage agreed that they were a perfect couple. Mike was healthy and successful, while Missy was beautiful, caring, and kind. They were both good people and had the potential to be wonderful parents. In January 1991, Missy found out she was pregnant. They began converting the living room into a nursery and were excited to plan every detail for their first child. The tropical storm hit the area in late August, bringing heavy rains and strong winds. Mike and Missy attended Lamaze classes together. They had chosen a name for their child and were looking forward to Missy giving birth naturally as soon as class ended. The sky darkened with ominous clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance. That Lamaze class would be the last time anyone saw Missy and Mike alive. The storm hit on the night of August 21st, and after it passed, everyone returned to their normal routines. Children began arriving at Key Largo Elementary School, and teachers discussed the terrible storm that had just occurred. However, Missy did not show up for work that day. Whenever she took a day off, she always called ahead to avoid worrying her students. Demonstrating her dedication to her job, Missy's absence was not only unusual, but also alarming. Worried, her colleagues called Missy's home, but no one answered. They continued to call Mike's sister, Sharon, to inquire about the situation. After hearing the news, but Sharon called Missy's home, but no one answered her either. She tried again, but still, no one picked up. Strangely, even Mike and Missy's answering machine was not working. Sharon informed Missy's colleagues that she was unable to contact her, prompting them to visit Missy and Mike's home. The door was locked, and all the curtains were drawn except for one, which was only partially open, allowing the colleagues to catch a glimpse of the living room. They were shocked to find a person lying motionless on the floor, with only the person's feet visible. Her colleagues felt worried after witnessing such a disturbing scene through the window. Missy's neighbor then noticed something unusual and decided to check it out when Missy's colleagues informed him about the situation inside the house. Feeling that something was wrong, the neighbor decided to break down the door. When they entered the house, they found Mike lying on his back on the floor. His arms and legs spread out, his head was wrapped in tape, his mouth was also covered with tape, and white socks were placed in front of him. Shocked, they quickly called the police to report the incident. The police arrived promptly to investigate the scene. While searching the house, they found a shoe print on Mike's throat and a metal bar in the kitchen. The police believe the metal bar was the murder weapon and that the killer may have stomped on Mike's throat before killing him in the master bedroom. Missy's body was found. Her wrists were tied to her ankles with what appeared to be a clothesline, and a tie was wrapped tightly around her neck. 2 pieces of tape covered her eyes. Missy had been abused while she was pregnant and then strangled to death. In the following months, the townspeople began installing alarm systems and purchasing weapons, worried that they might be the next victims. Meanwhile, the police were trying to determine what had happened. They believed that the killer had cut the phone lines and entered Missy's house using a ladder left by a contractor. The timing of the attack during a storm allowed him to enter and exit the house undetected. Interestingly, the killer only had a metal bar with him and used items found in the house to tie up his victims. Suggesting that he was experienced, DNA was collected from the crime scene, including semen samples found on various parts of Missy's body. The results of the autopsy confirmed that both Mike and Missy died from strangulation. Mike suffered injuries from being struck with the metal bar, but he also had severe bruising on his abdomen, indicating that he had been kicked in the stomach. Additionally, his throat was severely damaged from being trampled. The strangulation marks on Missy's neck indicated that she had fought back for some time, forcing the killer to attempt multiple strangulation maneuvers before ultimately killing her. Tragically, her child, Kyle, died from a lack of oxygen in the womb during the attack. Police believe that Missy was the primary target and that the perpetrator may have known Mike. As a result, the police began questioning people she knew. Police eliminated 3 potential suspects after they volunteered to provide DNA samples. The police then noticed that some of Mike's business dealings did not appear to be entirely transparent. They discovered that Mike had made several trips to a notorious drug manufacturing center during the height of Miami's illegal drug trade. The police investigated Mike's business dealings, but ultimately, this investigation went nowhere. As there was no evidence that Mike was involved in any illegal activity, time passed without much progress. Then, unexpectedly, there was a breakthrough in the case. Renowned FBI psychologist Dale Hinman was brought in and used the available evidence to create a detailed psychological profile of the killer. She suggested that the killer may have a criminal record, that he knew at least some aspects of Missy's habits, and that he may have been obsessed with her. This was a major turning point in the investigation. A police officer has been trying to catch a suspect named Thomas Overton for years. Thomas is believed to be responsible for the attack and murder of a 20-year-old girl. The girl was last seen at a movie theater where Thomas worked, and her body was later discovered wrapped in a tarp with popcorn kernels nearby. Although the police suspect Thomas, there is no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Thomas later became the prime suspect in the murders of Missy and Mike. However, there is still no direct evidence linking him to their murders. On October 6, 1996, Thomas was arrested while committing an armed robbery and was imprisoned for this crime. He later injured himself in a failed escape attempt while being transported to prison. He asked the paramedics to provide him with gauze. The police collected DNA from the swab and compared it to evidence found at Missy's home, confirming his involvement in the crime. Shortly thereafter, Mike confessed to the murder. He had previously worked at a gas station that Missy often visited, and he had attempted to flirt with her, which she found offensive. She confided in others about the encounter, especially since she was 8 months pregnant at the time, the night before her death. Missy told Mike's sister, Sharon, that Mike had approached her again. This time, More aggressively, she had no idea that Mike had seen her address on a check she had written and had been stalking her for days. Thomas regularly visited Missy's home to spy on her. Revealing his disturbing obsession with her, he noticed contractors coming in to build a nursery for Missy's family on August 21st. During a storm, Thomas put on a mask, black military fatigues, and gloves, and went to Missy's house. He climbed a ladder to the nursery, opened the glass door, and quietly entered. At that time, Mike was in the kitchen and was probably unaware that Thomas was coming up behind him. Suddenly, Thomas hit Mike on the head with a metal bar, causing Mike to instinctively fight back. A struggle broke out, but Thomas eventually overpowered Mike and strangled him to death during this attack. Missy entered the room, saw what was happening, screamed, and ran to her bedroom. Thomas followed her, and in his confession, he claimed that she begged for her life and tried to tell him that she was pregnant. However, her words had no effect on him. He then killed Missy and abused her. The trial of Thomas Overton began on October 17, 1998. Prosecutors presented new evidence, including photos of Missy's pregnant belly that Thomas took after she was killed. During the trial, Thomas smiled and gestured towards Mike and Missy's family. Throughout the proceedings, he remained cold and cruel, seemingly enjoying the attention and considering himself a victor. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, on March 18, 1999, Thomas Overton was sentenced to death for the murders of Mike and Missy McIver. He is currently on death row and has shown no remorse for his actions. Mike's parents died shortly after his death. Unable to cope with the loss, Mike's sister, Sharon, described Thomas as the embodiment of evil.